Story 1.
My wife cheated, invited her AP to our former home, but I turned the tables with a perfect response. Hey, I've been quietly observing here for a bit, dealing with the whole cheating thing in my life. My wife and I have been married for 8 years, a bit longer if you count the time we've been together. And we have 2 young kids. This year has been rough with some arguments, but nothing I thought would lead my wife to cheat. Recently, I noticed her being distant and uncommunicative, so I confronted her one evening. She admitted she wasn't happy and felt no spark. Initially, I blamed myself for not being attentive, which was true. The next day, I found a really lovey-dovey message on her phone. I discovered she'd been messaging a guy for a long time, with lots of I love yous and plans for a future together. It hit me hard. Following advice from various threads, I didn't confront immediately. I read a lot, consulted a couple of lawyers, one on retainer now, got my head straight, and stayed calm. A couple of days ago, I calmly confronted my wife and asked if she was having an affair. After a few minutes, she admitted everything. Long story short, it's been going on for 6 months, and she claims it's the deepest emotional connection ever. Complete BS. Anyway, I set boundaries, cut off contact, suggested marriage counseling, and more. The breaking point came when she resisted cutting off contact, even when I asked her to do it in front of me, and insisted on seeing him one last time. I stood my ground and told her, if he's so important, pack up and go live with him. She backed off, calling me a controlling yank. She sent a text this morning, but I suspect she'll try a different means of communication. I don't see much hope, and I honestly don't want it at this point. I just want to be able to tell my kids in 20 years that I tried. We have marriage counseling tomorrow, but I'm leaning toward filing before wasting more time. I'm cautious due to my kids, but is this the right move? I have the paperwork filled out with my lawyer. They just need to process it, and I'll pick a date to have her served. Going the doormat route won't end well. I need to think about my future, my kids, and moving on. Update: the past few weeks have been really tough, but they've given me time to think and reflect. My wife and I went to counseling after our first big talk, and I must say, the counselor was great at listening to both of us without blaming anyone. She helped us navigate our new reality and pointed out some issues in our relationship. While it doesn't excuse my wife's behavior, it's good to know for the future to avoid making the same mistakes. As mentioned, my wife didn't seem to follow my request to cut off contact with the affair partner. I noticed some messages before she went completely silent. After seeing that, I decided to file for divorce, and she was served a few days ago. At the same time, I had a heart-to-heart with my father-in-law, who I'm really close to, prioritizing support for our kids over our relationship. It seemed like my wife wanted to ignore the issue. Naturally, my wife was really upset at first. Her fantasy was shattered, but our therapist talked through why this needed to happen from my perspective. I think she's starting to realize the consequences of her actions and the real things that will be lost. I'm just trying to process the new life ahead and the big change in my identity from being a husband and father to something else. Similarly, since I filed, my wife was shocked, and she's been very emotional these past few days. I honestly think she never expected me to walk away. I've kept my distance, but I've seen a noticeable change in her. On a positive note, we've talked more, kept our conversations civil, and focused on our shared priorities, especially our children. I've made it clear that she caused a huge wound, and she needs to do the heavy lifting to help repair it and give me space and time if I can ever start to forgive. I'll say it again and again, her actions are the most selfish, self-centered, and horrible things you could do to a person. But I haven't lost sight of the fact that we still need to raise our children. That's my main focus as I figure out how to move forward to the next phase of my personal happiness. I'm honestly proud that I found the strength not to dwell in self-pity, anger, or sadness, and to make the right moves to keep my dignity and look forward to a brighter future. I don't know all the next steps, and my feelings are constantly changing, but I'm starting to feel some inner peace. I'm in the post-serving phase and working closely with my counsel. What I'm wondering is if any betrayed spouses here took advantage of the affair fog to get better divorce terms, and how they managed it. My soon-to-be ex-wife is clearly deep in the fog, still contacting the affair partner, and a moment, I haven't bothered her about it. Update: my wife cheated, forming a stronger emotional connection with someone else. We still love each other but aren't in love anymore. I filed for divorce, and it's been about a month and a half since everything came to light. I'm working hard to move forward. The process is ongoing, and I'll share updates when the time is right, probably in a while. If you've been through this, I'd appreciate any advice, lessons learned, or things you wish you had known. Just reaching out in case there's more helpful information. I filed for divorce, and things are moving in that direction. I'd like to hear how others dealt with in-laws and friends, especially when they try to make you look like the bad guy after filing. I informed some in-laws, my family, and a few friends, but I didn't make it widely known to keep some things private. However, it seems my soon-to-be ex-wife has shared her side, and I'm getting cold vibes from her family and others. It's tough when close family turns their backs, even though I've been a good dad and my wife has acted immorally. Did people eventually see the truth and change their opinions, or did they just move on? While it's natural for people to take sides, those who believe her probably weren't loyal to you anyway. You don't need people like that. Focus on your kids and your side of the story. At the end of the day, you know what happened, and that's what matters. Update. Today brings some closure to the saga that began last summer, during which I sought advice from everyone here. Going through this process is tough, especially when close family is far away. It's challenging to be alone with your thoughts, but there's wisdom and introspection to gain. To recap, my wife cheated, and I found out. Realizing there was no hope as she was deeply involved with the affair partner, I filed for divorce immediately. The past few months have been frosty but relatively drama-free as my soon-to-be ex and I separated our lives in the house while still co-parenting. The discovery and mediation process moved quickly. We agreed on 50/50 custody for our kids, along with schedules and holidays. Asset division in our no-fault state followed the book, with some give and take. The final conclusion is on the horizon, and for the most part, the divorce is complete. Lessons learned: first, don't bother with the pick-me dance. I tried for a week before realizing her decision to cheat was hers to live with. Second, hire an experienced family law attorney who is reasonable. The person who helped me was crucial in reaching a resolution without crazy fees. Third, lean on friends and family for support as much as possible. Fourth, prioritize regular exercise to maintain mental health. I started hitting the weights a month after D-Day, and I'm starting to see the benefits. The confidence gained has been helpful to get through the process. Fifth, engage in individual counseling and talk with someone. This has been tremendously helpful. Sixth, realize that the cheater's decisions are their own. No matter the excuses, it's on them. I heard it all from my soon-to-be ex, but I now know our marriage went wrong after she invited someone into her life who fed her lines, stroked her ego, and gave her extra attention. She had to make me the bad guy to justify her actions in her mind. While stress may have played a role, not communicating with her husband and confiding in a two-time divorced cheater with no moral compass is entirely her responsibility and a recipe for disaster. The final chapter of this saga is yet to be written, but poor choices carry consequences. That's all I'll say on the matter. Update. I'm not too far from moving into my own place. Because of my kids and legal reasons, I've stayed in our marital house during this process, and I've shared updates in a couple of other threads. Thankfully, the end of the tunnel is near for me. Even though I'll have to co-parent with my cheating ex, I've made it clear that she ended our marriage and any chance of friendship. I don't have room in my life for a dishonest cheater. Despite her insistence on being there for me and helping with my new house, I firmly stated that she ruined our relationship, and I'm simply giving her what she wanted, to replace me. I've even told her she won't be welcome in my house. Has anyone else dealt with an ex wanting to stick around? I guess it's some sort of appearance thing, trying to make the split seem less bad if we're friends. So far, her affair partner hasn't shown up, and she tries to hide it. But I know it's only a matter of time before their supposed deep emotional connection takes them elsewhere. I have no desire to be in the same room with them, but I'll watch from a safe distance when it all falls apart. Today, the official decree came, and I'm no longer married. I got the keys to my new house, and we start moving soon. I chose a buyout to start fresh and got lucky finding a well-kept house a minute from my current home. It has a huge backyard, wood fire pit, big garage, and a prime location. I back up to a nature preserve, perfect for my outdoor hobbies. It's my own little paradise. Some may wonder why I chose to stay so close. Well, I want to be near my kids so they know their dad is close when they need me. Following the community's advice, I focused on what's important, started working out, and embraced a new career opportunity that's paying off. I haven't bothered with online dating or looking for a new partner and plan to enjoy the single life for a while. My focus is on my 2 kids and personal growth. As for my ex and her affair partner, I'm starting to let go of that disaster. Whatever happens is no longer my concern. As someone wisely said, when someone gets with a cheater, they're getting someone who cheated. I did my best as a husband and father, and it's time for someone else to appreciate it. Update. That said, in my newfound free time, unfortunately, I've reflected and seen the life I had planned disappear. I wonder, how could this happen so quickly? I'm sure everyone has had time to ponder the who, what, where, when, and why. But when I look back, my spouse and I had a great life ahead. Our careers were doing well after some initial major efforts to establish ourselves. We had a paid-off home, 2 beautiful kids out of diapers, and college funds for them, among many other things going for us. Thinking about this is my final challenge to overcome, but I can't grasp the mindset of someone who had so much but decided to destroy it all and go all in on an unreliable serial cheater. Do I need to mention the affair partner one more time to this group? I know I'll struggle for a while to heal from all this, but when I look at our history and lives together, I just wonder how a person can be so selfish and stupid. I understand desire can't be negotiated and all that jazz, but the whole point of being married is to work together as a team and continuously fall back in love with each other. Update. Wanted to give a quick update, especially for those folks who just went through their D-Day and are worried about what life may be like. It's been 6 weeks post-decree, and I moved into my new place a month ago. I've been working like crazy to set it up as my sanctuary, and now it's well furnished and feels like home, my home. My kids have visited many times, and the rotation is working well. People say kids are resilient, and now that I've seen it firsthand, it's reassuring. I'm happy to report that they're handling things pretty well. We have our own fun at Dad's house, and they've told me many times they love being over. As for me, it was initially weird having newfound freedom, but making to-do lists and setting daily, weekly, and long-term goals is helping a lot. I was initially sad, but keeping busy keeps those feelings away. Right now, I'm solely focused on self-improvement. While I've thought about putting myself back on the scene, truthfully, I have no interest. So I'm keeping my focus on home improvement, fitness, and my kids. Regarding the cheating ex, I keep it cordial, and that's it. No sign of the supposed deep emotional connection affair partner yet. What the heck? But who cares? Tonight I sat outside, had a few beers and a cigar, and enjoyed the peace and tranquility of my property. I thought about getting away from the situation my ex put me in, and it feels like the right thing to do. For those at the beginning and doubting leaving, I get it. It's the toughest thing, and heartbreak is a kick in the junk. But deciding to eject a cheater was the only right decision, and I believe with time, it will get better. Update. Now into the second month of being on my own, and my house is coming together nicely. My kids are doing well, making memories, and I have some fun trips planned. Following the usual advice, I've stepped up my weight training and dieting, upgraded my home gym, and regularly hit the heavy bag. It seems to be working. In my monthly therapy sessions, my counselor noticed positive changes in my weight distribution and mentioned great progress mentally and physically, a little affirmation that things are heading in the right direction. I haven't bothered with dating at this point. It's early, and I'm enjoying my free time, new projects, and spending time with friends. So, to the main point of the post, and I'm sure everyone wonders, has bad luck struck bad people? I don't have the satisfying post detailing the downfall of the affair partner or the ex-wife just yet. However, it's radio silence, as the supposed greatest romance ever hasn't been revealed, and the affair partner remains a secret. I wonder why this could be. Is my ex-wife managing her image and waiting for a better time to reveal everything? But isn't the thrill of the affair gone now that they can't sneak around? I'm no longer around, so I find it odd. I suspect they're still communicating. She makes it obvious by hiding her phone when I'm present during kids' activities. But why? You wanted this, sneaked around, claimed it was amazing. Why not broadcast it now that the horrible ex-husband is gone? Has this happened to anyone else with their ex and affair partner? Update. I'm nearing the 6-month mark post-divorce and almost a year past D-Day. I hope to keep offering assistance in any small way to those in need. I deeply appreciate the support I've received and would love to return the favor. On that note, 6 months post-D-Day, there's a lot of positive news. My house feels like a home, my kids are comfortable and enjoy coming over, and they've made some neighborhood friends. I'm extremely thankful that the little ones have handled this process so well, understanding the balance between dad time and mom time without any complaints or tears. While they're here, I've immersed myself in numerous home improvements. The house I moved into had some neglect from the previous owner, but I see it as an opportunity to make it my own. Additionally, I've set up a home gym with everything I need, managing to work out and box 4 times a week, bringing my body back to where it needs to be. Throughout this ordeal, I also underwent a significant internal career change at my workplace and, surprisingly, received praise instead of making any mistakes. I've kept my situation private, received a raise, and gained exposure to move my career upward. Although I still struggle daily with mental health and focus, I manage it with therapy and workouts, and things are improving. I think of my ex-wife less each day, and each small step forward brings relief. As for her, she's still in la-la land, but we co-parent decently. Recently, I firmly keep our conversations strictly about the kids and maintain a cordial relationship. Anyone following my story might wonder about the saga of the affair partner. All I can say is the world's greatest love story hasn't gone public, but my kids recently informed me he's been around in a small capacity. It's amusing to me that 6 months post-D-Day they're still sneaking around. These are surely the great hallmarks of a long-lasting, trusting relationship guaranteed to stand the test of time. I've accepted that whatever happens will happen. At this point, I feel fortunate to be away from a person willing to lie to their most trusted partner without remorse. I have a solid chance at building an even better life than before. Good riddance and good luck. Update, just wanted to share a great conversation I had with my buddy last night over a few beers. It's amazing how Friday night discussions can sometimes solve the world's problems. For context, my buddy went through a divorce 7 years ago, and his situation is surprisingly similar to mine. Even our exes share the same birthday. As I've mentioned in recent posts, the grand reveal of the affair partner AP and my ex is slowly unfolding. While I maintain low contact with my ex, my kids make comments, and it's hard not to feel bothered. Anyway, my buddy noticed my frustration and shared something that really helped. Dude, think about their lives, two cheaters getting together. Consider how lousy and low value that guy is for manipulating a married woman with kids. Now, look at it this way. They have to make it work, no matter how bad it gets. You or I can meet new people, and if it doesn't work out, we move on without any problem or worry. They're stuck. He has to be in your old house, knowing you built that, dealing with your kids, and inheriting your selfish ex and in-laws. But they're stuck or else they look stupid. Can you imagine that kind of hell? But you're free. I pondered on that, and this morning, it really helped me gain perspective. What a dreadful future they have to look forward to. Just wanted to share this thought and ask if others have reached a similar conclusion or witnessed it in action. Thanks as always to you awesome people. Wow, that makes a lot of sense, trying to play house in a home that the affair partner never built. A home that he helped to destroy. Update, a friend is invited to my kid's birthday. For those who remember my story, I've got something to share, but right now, I need some advice. Here's the background. My daughter's birthday is this weekend. I already had a small celebration last weekend with my family, nothing extravagant, just some presents and cake, and my daughter loved it. Now the ex-wife is throwing her usual, look how great I am party this weekend. I did receive an invite, but I just found out the other day that the affair partner AP will be there. I called out my ex-wife, telling her it was a pretty lousy move, but she didn't respond. To make things worse, the ex-wife's co-workers and family friends who knew about the affair will also be there, and the party is at my old house. Enemy territory. This is terrible overall, especially since it's my daughter's party. After our divorce, I can't shake the feeling that it's a setup. It's a lose-lose situation, and after talking to some supportive members here, it feels like stepping into a pit of vipers. The only idea I have is to go in well-dressed, with a fresh haircut, and showcase my new physique. I've been putting in the work and staying positive, but either way, I just don't like this. It feels super manipulative on the part of the ex-wife. She knows exactly how she's playing this and wants me to react in a petty way. Any advice is appreciated. Update, regarding the exciting update, this one's a good story. Initially, I told my ex-wife that I would be joining the party. What I didn't do was inform her that I changed my mind. I waited until Saturday morning to swing by the house and drop off my daughter's card and gift. Unbeknownst to me, the kids were at Grandma and Grandpa's house for the morning. As I drove into the driveway in my sports car, AP's car was on the side of the road. I quietly strolled into the backyard, surprising both the ex-wife and AP as they were setting up decorations. The look of utter terror was on both their faces when I saw them. I didn't feel anger, just a sense of how sad they both are. Good luck together. Is that growth? I kept my composure and said, I'm here to give my daughter her present, but I won't be joining. The ex-wife was shocked, and she practically pleaded for me to join, but I declined politely. I told her I went to her parents' place to give my daughter her gift and parted ways. I even gave a casual, hey, see you later, bro, to AP before leaving with my head held high. Not more than 3 minutes later, I got a call from the ex-wife pleading for me to come to the party, but I held my ground and politely refused. Shortly after, I dropped off the gift, spent a few minutes at the ex-in-laws, played with my kids, and said my goodbyes, all very kindly, without mentioning the situation. As for me, I kept busy taking care of my house, had a good workout much needed after a break, and went on a date. It was somewhat of a bust, but she was nice, and at least it was a distraction. My daughter called me today, thanked me for the gift, but didn't ask why I wasn't there. As everyone said, she was so busy she didn't pay attention. There it is, I know if I had gone, it would have set me back for nothing. Instead, she told everyone I'd be there, and with me a no-show but present, people will likely figure out why. Now I can enjoy my weekend without feeling mentally exhausted and do some fun things. Update, I'm still grinning about the little maneuver I pulled last week. Things have been going well for me since then. Anyway, here's a bit of humor for you, some background. Since D-Day, as those who have followed my story might recall, my in-laws have distanced themselves from me. I understand it. Family comes first. However, One member of my extended family has reached out, and we regularly spend time together. He's genuinely a person of character. I received a text on Saturday during the party. "Hey man, let's grab some beers this week. Your presence is missed here." Fast forward to the other day when we met up, started having beers, and got to the point. He began talking about how awkward the party was, with people clearly uncomfortable about the situation. Surprisingly, AP wasn't introduced to anyone. The ex-wife deliberately kept him apart during the party, directing him on what to do. The in-laws didn't bother talking to him and seemed pretty annoyed, sitting by themselves. He looked like a fish out of water, spending most of the time indoors and avoiding almost everyone. There were also quiet comments among some of the in-laws, aunts, and uncles saying that the party was lacking in class. I swear I'm moving toward indifference, but I couldn't help but laugh. My absence was well understood, and the fact that I had given an earlier gift to my daughter was known. So it seems like the family had a full understanding of why I wasn't there. Mission accomplished. Anyway, that's my Friday humor.
Story 2.
My husband couldn't forgive my past mistake because of a 15-year-old videotape. 10 days ago, I discovered that my wife of 6 years was recorded on camera at a friend's bachelorette party along with 2 male dancers. This event was secretly filmed by another woman at the party using a cell phone. Later, that woman confided in her boyfriend, who happened to know me. Although this guy and I aren't friends, we do share some mutual acquaintances from high school. His girlfriend told him not to reveal the video or share it with anyone, and they kept it hidden all these years. It's important to note that this guy and I have never been on good terms. We've merely crossed paths due to our mutual connections. However, they broke up some time ago, and since then, he's been casually showing the video to his friends as a sort of entertaining story. It became a recurring topic at gatherings, meetings, or guys' nights out, purely for amusement. Most of the women seen engaging in inappropriate acts in the video were in relationships at the time. I can't help but suspect they might have been mocking me and the other guys, although that might just be my own insecurity talking, as the story had never reached me or any of my close friends. That changed about a month ago when one of our mutual friends had a drink with this guy. The conversation somehow steered toward the story, and he began joking about how his ex-girlfriend had recorded a group of girls going wild at a bachelorette party, including 2 dancers getting involved with one of the women who happened to be my girlfriend at the time and now my wife. Apparently, he had trust issues with his girlfriend back then and kept a close watch on her activities, so she recorded everything as proof of her innocence in case he suspected her of cheating. This led to her involving her friends to demonstrate to her then-boyfriend that she was the innocent and virtuous one. According to our mutual friend, during this incident, all the women, including the one with the camera, went backstage into the dancers' dressing room. My girlfriend was the only one that went all in, not just BJ and flashing. She took on both dancers at the same time in their dressing room, while her other friends gave BJs and flashed. She was being plowed by both dancers, while the other woman secretly recorded. About a month ago, my friend became aware of this situation and felt the urge to confide in me. However, he grappled with this decision because he was well aware of my current happy marriage with her, and he shared a close bond with both of us. He understood the depth of our love for each other, especially considering we have 2 young daughters together, aged 3 and 5. 11 days ago, on a Friday, my friend reached out to me and expressed a desire to discuss something crucial. His tone during the conversation indicated the significance of the matter. I believed it was a substantial issue, possibly related to some challenges he was facing, and he needed someone to talk to. Over the years, our friendship, which began in high school, had been characterized by mutual support. The following day, we arranged to meet at a bar, and I noticed he was already there when I arrived. His anxious demeanor upon my arrival made it apparent that he was preoccupied with something, and I suspected it had to do with me rather than himself. I grew up in a tough neighborhood. I'm a big guy, standing at 6 feet 3 inches. I've had a few run-ins with the law in the past, mostly related to my crew activities, which gave me a certain reputation. However, all of that is behind me now. Among my peers, I've always been seen as a natural leader, with many guys looking up to me. During my teenage years, I used to be quite aggressive and got into numerous fistfights, but going to prison a couple of times, getting married, and having kids have transformed me. It's been over 8 years since I last got into any trouble. I'm less aggressive now, more composed and mature, especially since I have 2 kids and a stable job as a union electrician. I have a long history with one of my friends. We go way back to high school. I used to protect him from bullies since he's a year younger than me. Now, at 29 years old and working a decent corporate job, our social circles didn't overlap much. Anyway, when I took a seat at the bar, I could sense that whatever he had to say was about me, judging from his body language. It made me quite anxious, so I turned to him asked how he was doing, and inquired about what was bothering him. He replied that what he was about to tell me might seriously affect my relationship with my wife, but that he felt I needed to know. He didn't want me to find out years down the line that he knew something but didn't tell me. He felt it would be dishonest to keep this from me, and at this point, I thought he should just go ahead and spill the beans. Then he dropped the bombshell. A few weeks ago, while hanging out with some friends, one of them showed him a video from about 5 years ago. The video depicted my wife involved with 2 dancers in a dressing room. When I heard this, I couldn't believe it. I was flooded with emotions like anger, confusion, and shame all at once. I had the urge to confront him, thinking it might be some kind of prank, but deep down, I knew it was true. I distinctly remembered the day my wife mentioned attending a bachelorette party for one of her friends 5 years ago. Back then, we had been exclusively dating for about 7 months, but hadn't moved in together yet. My girlfriend came from a traditional Irish Catholic family, and she was exceptionally beautiful. I truly love my wife, so my initial reaction was to protect her honor and reputation. In the past, the old me might have even confronted my friend aggressively for bringing this up. Maybe that's why the acquaintance didn't inform me earlier, knowing I had a history of rage. I inquired if my friend had the video, and he claimed it was on his friend's phone. He said he only saw part of it, but I suspected he was lying because usually, people don't watch just part of something like that. However, that detail doesn't matter at this point. I realized my friend wouldn't bring me here just to play a cruel joke about my wife's affair. That would be extremely risky with someone like me. So I asked him how I could contact the guy with the video, and my friend said he could arrange something. I inquired if I could have the guy's phone number, and my friend stepped outside to make a call. We went outside together, and upon returning, he told me the guy wasn't answering but had sent a text. My friend assured me he'd keep me updated once he heard back. I initially wanted to leave the bar and immediately call my wife, but my friend advised me to take some time to think things through before doing anything rash. So I decided to stay at the bar and talk to my friend about my relationship with my wife, which had been great up to that point. I never expected her to be involved in something like this. During the first year of our dating, she did show a bit of a wild streak, but I didn't realize how wild it was until now. After that first year, it seemed like she had turned her life around, leaving that party phase behind. However, she does change when she drinks. When we started dating, she was still in that party phase, but that's no excuse because we were in a committed relationship when she attended that bachelorette party. Our relationship, like any other, has had its ups and downs. Her issues with alcohol were a problem at one point, but she got it under control, mainly because of our first daughter. While I was talking to my friend, he received a text from the guy and said he could share his number with me. I immediately called him and asked if we could meet so he could give me the video on a flash drive. He told me he was out of town and would return next week. I expressed my interest in obtaining a copy of the video and inquired about how much he wanted in exchange for deleting it from his phone or any other storage. I hoped he'd agree to delete it willingly, but he asked for $11,500. This was one of the reasons I never liked him. I managed to negotiate it down to $11,000. There seemed to be no reason for him to hold on to this video. My wife and his ex-girlfriend were no longer friends, and his ex-girlfriend likely wouldn't hold it against him. I think he was just being a jerk. However, I was glad he asked for money because it allowed us to create a legal agreement preventing him from releasing the video to the public, leaving me as the sole owner of the only copy. My aim was not only to protect my wife but also my daughters and myself from further embarrassment. The thought of a tape of my wife circulating on the internet would be a significant embarrassment for my family. I wanted to control the situation as much as possible before dealing with my wife later. From what I've heard, the video is too explicit to even contemplate. That night, I was too intoxicated to drive, so I had to take a lift home and leave my car in the bar's parking lot. When I got home, I could barely walk through the door. All I remember is calling my wife at 4:03 a.m. and passing out. I wanted to confront her that night, but I was too intoxicated to handle it. The next morning, I woke up with a hangover on my couch, wrapped in a blanket. My wife was supposed to go to work that day, as far as I can recall, but she called in because she was concerned about my unusual behavior and wanted to figure out what was going on. She handed me a glass of water as I sat there, and after taking a sip, she asked me what was bothering me. I glanced at her, and all the memories from the previous night came rushing back. I hadn't been this angry with my wife in a long time, and I needed answers. The images of her with those 2 dancers were all I could think about when I looked at her. I couldn't even find the words to speak. I just started sobbing like a baby. I couldn't remember the last time I cried, and that was one of the lowest moments in my life. My wife seemed bewildered, and she started crying too. She wanted to comfort me with a hug, but I pushed her away. At this point, she was getting frustrated and kept asking me what was happening. I finally told her that there was a video out there showing her involved with 2 dancers at a bachelorette party 5 years ago. The look on her face was one of confusion. Then she began denying it, claiming it was fake. She insisted that it couldn't be true, but I reminded her of which bachelorette party it was and asked if she was there. She admitted being there but vehemently denied cheating on me. She said it was all lies, but I suggested that perhaps she was intoxicated and couldn't recall what happened. She fired back that she would remember if she had been with 2 guys. She asked me to show her the video, and I replied that the guy with the video was out of town. At this point, I really wanted to believe her. She seemed genuinely convinced that it wasn't her. I thought maybe it was a scam to extort $11,000 from me, but that amount didn't seem worth a stunt like this. I really wanted to see the video to make sure my wife was telling the truth. The guy messaged me that he'd be back in town on Tuesday, and today is Sunday, so I've been quite anxious. I can't stop thinking about that video. My wife has been acting strangely around the house, doing extra things as if she feels guilty. She keeps asking if I'm okay all the time, making it seem like I'm the crazy one, or that I just made up this whole story. Who would invent something like this? By Monday, I couldn't wait any longer. I told the guy that we didn't need to meet right away. I could send him $11,000 through Cash App, and he could download the video using Dropbox. He told me he didn't have enough space on his Dropbox and couldn't delete anything to free up room for the video, so I suggested he create another Dropbox account, which he did. By Monday evening, I had sent him $11,000 on Cash App, and he sent me a link to the video. I opened the video and saw a group of women, including my wife's friends from back then, cheering with excitement as the dancers performed. Then I witnessed my wife touching the dancers and their private areas through their clothes. The footage switched to the dressing room, where my wife and 2 other women were on their knees preparing the dancers. I counted about 5 guys, if you catch my drift. And then there's another part of the video where my wife was engaging in acts while still clothed. 2 dancers were taking turns. The video was just as explicit as I had feared. It looked homemade and poorly done, but it was undoubtedly her. There was no mistaking it. Her voice was unmistakable. This private moment that I thought was just between us was actually shared with total strangers. It seems like the dancers knew they were being recorded but didn't care. I'm not sure if my girlfriend and her friends were aware because they never acknowledged it. She wasn't forced into anything. In some cases, she was actively seeking attention and even taking the initiative. She gave it up to a bunch of guys she met that night. But the very first time I met her, she acted like she wasn't so easy. While I didn't get the sense that she was some sort of pure Mary when we started dating, she didn't pretend to be that way because she was a party girl at the time. She made me wait for about 2 months before our first intimate encounter. Now, everything I thought I knew about my wife is being called into question. In our current relationship, her being close with me is a big deal, especially after our second daughter was born. And here she was, enthusiastically engaging in acts with complete strangers without holding anything back. I just need to vent because I always believe there were special moments you share with someone you love, and it feels like that belief has burst like a bubble in my face. This is seriously affecting my self-esteem, and the worst part is that I can't help thinking that I wasn't enough for her back then, and I'm not enough for her now. Nowadays, I have a few extra pounds on me, but back then I was in good shape. I'd like to think I'm a good-looking guy, but despite that, she did this willingly with that guy. I'm curious if any of you guys in relationships have experienced something like this because it can't have been just me. My wife, up until I saw this video, was almost perfect. A great mother to my 2 girls, takes care of me, and she's not lazy like most unfaithful wives I've read about on this site. She's completely traditional now, although I might not have said that when we first started dating, but she's grown into it over time. That's what makes it so hard to just walk away from all of this. Regarding your question about protection, they did use it. Not that it really matters, but they were using protection, and she was so into it that she probably wouldn't have noticed if they didn't. I remember how adamant she was about using protection the first time we were close, and it actually scored her some points in my book back then. This whole situation makes me wonder if our relationship all this time has just been a big lie. Maybe I don't really know who she is. Perhaps she had other partners I didn't even know about because she could have sworn on her life that the person in the video wasn't her before I saw it. If I had just heard about the video and hadn't seen it, I might have believed her. She was that convincing. So now I'm wondering what else I'm believing that isn't true. When she came back home that evening, I connected the video to my TV so she could clearly see it was her. I admit I went overboard because I was furious with her. I thought she'd show some remorse or beg for forgiveness, but no, it was like she had prepared excuses in advance. She even claimed that we weren't in an exclusive relationship at the time and went as far as saying we weren't even in a relationship. I fired back. Even if she was right about us not being exclusive at the time, though we both know she's lying. How is it normal to have closeness with two men like that? The person she portrayed to me and has been acting as ever since we met is not the same as the one I see in the video. Then she changes her story again, claiming that she was drunk and that alcohol caused them to take advantage of her. I pointed out that she was clearly a willing participant, and there was no point in the video where she resisted. She countered by saying the video was doctored and didn't show the whole picture. She also blamed alcohol, but she might have been a bit tipsy, yet she was fully aware. Her motor skills were normal, and she wasn't slurring her words. She kept lying and making excuses. I didn't want to argue with her, but it felt like she was avoiding full responsibility. She was upset with me for bringing this up, stating that it shouldn't matter because we were just friends with benefits back then, not in a committed relationship. She argued that it's in her past and asked how I'd feel if she held my past against me, claiming she accepted me for who I was. She questioned why I couldn't do the same for her. We've never had a violent relationship and I had never considered it, but the way she was dodging responsibility made me come close. I didn't want to wake up my kids, and I couldn't stand being around her that night, so I decided to leave the house with a few clothes and went to my coworker's house to cool off because I didn't want to do something I'd regret, especially since I was already on probation. Update: I packed some of my regular and work clothes and went to stay with a single friend who's also a coworker. My wife kept calling me to come back home, but I ignored her calls. I knew I'd have to face the situation eventually, but I was too angry to be around her. She sent me texts about how I wasn't willing to forgive her for her past, comparing it to how she had forgiven me for spending almost a year in prison for aggravated assault and being on probation for 10 years, which has held me back in life. I didn't go to college, but my wife did, and she works as a physical therapist. Still, I earn more because I'm a union electrician during the day and take on additional projects, usually in the evenings and after work, which are quite profitable. I felt like our marriage had become a joke, and I wasn't sure who she truly was. I'm not saying I thought I was marrying a perfect angel when I proposed to her. I knew almost everyone has some secrets, but this one felt like too much. I was aware she had a history when we got together, but I thought she was just like any other regular party girl. I remembered asking her how many guys she had been with, and she said 5, which was obviously a lie because that was after the bachelorette party. I knew about 3 of her previous boyfriends and 2 short flings she had, so who knows how many more I wasn't aware of. Still, a part of me believed that despite all this, we still had a great relationship. But another part of me wondered what other lies she had told me. At this point, I was deeply confused, and my life felt like it was falling apart. I couldn't stay with my friend for too long because I had electrical projects to work on and deadlines to meet. My house also served as storage and an office for all my equipment, so I couldn't hide out at my friend's place indefinitely. 2 days later, I had to return home because I still had shared responsibilities as a dad and a contract deadline to meet. The thought of divorce or legal separation hadn't even crossed my mind yet. I was still trying to process all the information. I felt deeply depressed, lost my appetite, and had a strong need to talk to someone. My dad has always been there for me in times of trouble, although when I was younger I didn't often heed his advice, which got me into a lot of trouble. But as I've gotten older, I've learned to listen to him more. I decided to call my dad and share my situation with him. He was surprised because he too didn't expect my wife to be that kind of woman, although he knew she had a somewhat troubled past, much like myself. My parents had grown fond of my wife because they believed she brought out the best in me and considered her a positive influence on my life. She had a knack for showing them the side of her that she wanted them to see, and she was quite good at it. Most people who knew her wouldn't think she was that kind of person unless perhaps you were one of her close friends. My dad has been married to my mom for 36 years, so he has some wisdom about relationships. He did mention that things were different back in their day since women didn't have access to social media, which amplified their interactions with men and their means of seeking validation beyond their local area. Nowadays, women can attract attention from men all over the world through social media. I found out more about this when I checked my wife's social media accounts, but I'll talk about that later. My dad advised me to return home and be a stable presence in the household, especially for the sake of my kids. He suggested that I should listen to my wife in a non-judgmental way to reduce her defensiveness and consider reconciliation if she's willing to put in the effort. He emphasized that the grass isn't always greener on the other side, and if my wife was able to deceive me, who's to say the next woman wouldn't do the same? He acknowledged that it would be difficult to forget what had happened, and if forgiving her became too challenging, I should start considering alternative plans. After talking with my dad, I felt more motivated to return home and confront this difficult situation head on. When I returned home to take my daughters to school, my wife wanted to have a private conversation with me. I told her we could talk later that night, and it seemed like she had been crying for a while. Honestly, I didn't feel much sympathy for her because she hadn't admitted to doing anything wrong. I received a text from the acquaintance stating that he had deleted his copy of the footage and no longer had it. Since I couldn't verify this, I had to take his word for it. I also informed him that I would be sending him some legal papers, as we had agreed upon. That evening, my wife was already at home when I returned. I was prepared for her to come clean and confess that she had cheated on me, essentially admitting that she had lied and presented herself differently at the beginning of our relationship. She was sitting on the balcony when I arrived, but even looking at her, I felt like I was staring at a stranger. The image I had of her before seemed to have shattered. I used to think that I was the only one with a troubled past, but at least everyone knows about mine, and I'm willing to take responsibility for it. When I got home, she was on the balcony. We usually spent time there painting. It was summer, and the weather in Massachusetts is usually pleasant during that time. She greeted me when she saw me, but I didn't respond. I went inside, took a shower, and changed out of my work clothes. A few minutes later, I joined her on the balcony with a beer in my hand. We sat there in silence for a few minutes. My plan was to let her speak and see what other lies she might come up with. I could tell she was expecting me to start interrogating her, but instead, I let the awkwardness linger between us. She began by apologizing for her infidelity, explaining that it happened during a different phase of her life. She mentioned that when our relationship had just started, she wasn't sure it would last, and she was still in a partying stage where she did things she now regrets. She expressed remorse for her actions and claimed that she had been faithful to me since then. I interrupted and asked her why she had been intimate with those men on the same night she met them. Yet I had waited for months for her to be close with me, even though she kept saying she wasn't ready. Her response was that she wanted our first time together to be special and meaningful, unlike her encounter with the dancers, which she said didn't mean anything to her. This explanation made no sense to me. I pointed out that she had been on her knees with them on the first day, so why did I have to wait for a special occasion? It felt like she was using closeness as a reward for me, while she freely engaged with strangers in an explicit manner in front of her friends. I also asked her if there were any other affairs she had that weren't recorded on tape. She insisted there were none, but I expressed my disbelief. She suggested that I check her phone and social media, stating that she was telling the truth. I mentioned that if she had enough time to edit her story, she had enough time to delete any incriminating evidence from her phone. Although I didn't really expect to find anything on her phone, I decided to take her up on the offer. She gave me access to her passwords for everything. After our conversation, while I felt she had admitted to her wrongdoing to some extent, I still believed she wasn't revealing everything. The seed of doubt had been planted, and I couldn't trust her fully anymore. Nevertheless, I decided to follow my dad's advice and give our relationship another chance. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the same bedroom with her, so I asked her to sleep in the guest room. The next day, I initially resisted the urge to check my wife's social media because I didn't expect to find anything. I figured she must have cleaned everything up if she had something to hide. However, I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I found it difficult to concentrate at work. Eventually, I gave in and logged into her social media accounts, reading all her messages. I started constantly monitoring her social media, and I soon realized how unhealthy this behavior was. While she wasn't posting explicit content, it surprised me how many guys were messaging her. I noticed that she was deleting these messages to hide them from me because I had notifications set up. And when I tried to check a message, it would be gone by the time I got to it. I thought maybe attractive women typically receive this kind of attention, even those who aren't posting anything suggestive. Most of the men messaging her were from the Middle East and South Asian countries, so there wasn't much to worry about in that regard. A week. Later, our relationship was still strained, although we were at least talking. We hadn't been close since I discovered the affair, but my wife was making efforts to reconnect. And she was growing tired of my constant reluctance to move past this. We had a conversation where she suggested we see a marriage counselor because she couldn't bear my behavior any longer. I explained to her that this was not something I could easily let go of just by talking to someone. I wasn't sure if our marriage could survive this affair, and my obsessive monitoring of her social media and text messages was taking a toll on me, so I decided to stop. Even though it made me feel worse because it seemed like I couldn't trust her, I even began to feel like people were talking behind my back. Once I was at a local bar with some friends and saw some acquaintances hanging out with the guy who sold me the video. I felt like they were looking at me and then turning away when I noticed them. It felt like they were mocking me. I thought I might be paranoid, but because of the video, I couldn't help but feel like everyone was laughing at me behind my back. It was a really disheartening feeling, and it left me feeling depressed, ashamed, and sometimes even angry. I felt disrespected, and the old me would have confronted them and given them a piece of my mind. These were grown men acting like little kids, but I guess some people never really grow up. Instead of confronting them, I decided to leave the bar and head home early. It had been 2 weeks since D-Day, and during that time, I hadn't been intimate with my wife. I was trying to give marriage counseling a shot because I was having a hard time moving on and getting close to my wife. The affair was constantly on my mind. My wife scheduled some counseling sessions and we arranged for a babysitter to watch the kids while we attended. Before our first session, I was concerned that the therapist might blame me for everything, as I had seen mentioned on this site. However, that wasn't the case. The therapist addressed my wife in a polite but direct manner. I won't go into all the details, but it felt like a thorough examination to get my wife to be completely honest and rebuild my trust. More truths came out, and my wife's reactions made me think there might be more incidents like that, although we might never know the full extent. I didn't feel like my wife was telling the whole truth, and the therapist seemed to share my doubts. The therapist encouraged us to work on reconciliation and provided us with techniques to rebuild trust. However, I wasn't convinced that reconciliation would work because my wife seemed to want to control what I knew. After our third counseling session, it seemed like my wife was losing interest because she felt like she was constantly under attack. I was learning things about her that I had no idea about, and a side of her personality emerged during the sessions that she wasn't comfortable with. She even tried to persuade me to switch to another therapist, but I declined. She started making excuses, like showing up late and claiming she was too busy with work to prevent us from attending. Sometimes she would call ahead of time to cancel without letting me know. All of this led me to believe that she wasn't making a genuine effort to take responsibility for her actions. This was about 6 weeks after I found out about the affair. Update: I finally talked to that friend who told me about the video involving my wife. I asked if he knew how many people were aware of it. He said he was actually one of the last to find out among his friends. Many people we went to high school with and most of his friends already knew about it. He mentioned that he stumbled upon it by accident. I also asked him about the guys who were making fun of me the other day, and it turns out they knew about it too, so I wasn't imagining things. It felt like most of the guys I encountered in our town knew about the video, and I was the last to find out. That was really embarrassing for me. When I got home, I shared with my wife how much it bothered me that so many people had seen the video and there was a chance it might still be out there. She suggested that we should move away from the area, and she was willing to change her job. It seemed like she had been thinking about moving even before I found out about the video. I just had a hunch. It appears she might have been ahead of me in knowing about the rumors regarding the video, and there's a possibility she knew about it before I did. I thought it might be a good idea to reach out to some of the friends who were in the video. Some of them are no longer friends with my wife, and some are still friends, but might not be honest with me since they'd want to protect her. Others who weren't her friends have moved away. I tried messaging them on Facebook, but none of them have responded yet. Update: it's been 3 months since D-Day, and I ended up being intimate with my wife. She had been deliberately trying to seduce me around the house, and one night I gave in. It was more about desire and frustration than love. Unlike before, for the first time since I found out about the video, she stayed in the master bedroom. The following night, she tried to initiate closeness again, but I wasn't interested. I usually don't refuse closeness with my wife, so she got frustrated. She was willing to do things in the bedroom I used to beg her for, but I just wasn't into it. She attempted to cuddle with me, but it felt suffocating. I endured it for one more night. Then I couldn't take it anymore, so I started sleeping on the couch because I couldn't sleep otherwise. The next day, she said she hated seeing me suffer like this over nothing and suggested giving me a hall pass for a year. But I explained that this wouldn't change the fact that she wasn't the person I thought she was. Being intimate with other women meant nothing to me. I wanted something more meaningful with someone I loved, but I didn't feel like I could get that from her anymore. About 4 months in, I called my dad and told him I didn't think I could forgive my wife and that I was considering legally separating from her. My dad suggested I move to another place for a couple of months, thinking that some time apart might help. When I got home that day, I told my wife I'd be looking for another apartment close by so I could still see the kids as often as before. She pleaded with me, but my mind was already made up. Update: a week later, I signed a month-to-month lease for a furnished studio apartment near my house. All this time, I've been having doubts about the whole separation idea. I didn't want to move away from my kids or leave my wife. I really tried to stay, but I felt like a temporary break from my wife would be good for my mental health. My intention wasn't to move out permanently, but to take some time for myself, Plus, I still have keys to my house where I keep my work tools and equipment. The night before I moved to my apartment, I had a serious argument with my wife. She got really upset with me, claiming she's given me space throughout this whole process. She thought I was acting completely irrational. She said I've gone mad for leaving them over something that happened when she wasn't even sure we were in a relationship. I told her we've discussed this before, and I believe there are still things she's not telling me. I need some time to collect myself. She asked how long we'd be separated, and I said I'd give it 2 months since most of my things are still at the house. We agreed to work toward reconciliation. After moving into my studio apartment, I felt more at ease. The first day was tough because my wife was really upset with me. She even told our 5-year-old daughter that I'd abandoned them. Who says that to a 5-year-old? When I came to take my 5-year-old to kindergarten and my 2-year-old to daycare, my daughter told me that Mom was crying when she asked her what was going on. She said that Daddy had abandoned them. I told my daughter that I hadn't abandoned them because I'm still here taking them to school. After I dropped my daughters off at school, I called my wife and told her she should feel bad about herself for trying to manipulate our kids by telling them lies about me. I asked her not to involve them in this situation. She refused to admit any wrongdoing, insisting that she wouldn't lie for me because, in her view, I abandoned them. I reminded her that the only real change was that I no longer live with them, but I've still been fulfilling all my responsibilities as a father. The next day, I took my kids to school and daycare, and they seemed happy. After dropping them off, I went to work. After work, I headed straight to my client's job site to finish up some extra projects, then I went home to rest. It was pretty much the same routine every day. I tried to avoid socializing too much because I didn't want to meet people who had seen that embarrassing video of my wife or face ridicule again, so I kept to myself. My wife and I talked about relocating when we reconcile, but for now, I was just too busy. I didn't see my wife for the rest of the week, but we talked on the phone regularly. Our conversations mainly revolved around coordinating our kids' activities, and sometimes she even dropped off food at my apartment. It was a stress-free week with no arguments, no kids crying or making demands. It felt like a partial vacation. I even thought that once this experience was over, I might move back into my house. I planned to take some time away from my wife and kids to clear my head. Some of my friends go on week-long hunting trips every season in places like Montana and Arkansas. There's one coming up next month, and I've been invited. I've put it off before because my wife always found a reason why I shouldn't go, and I usually agreed. The prices can be steep, but my buddy secured a group discount for us. The hunting trip was still a month away, but I've already purchased my ticket. We'll be traveling in my buddy's RV, and it promises to be a lot of fun. It's something to look forward to during these challenging times. The next couple of weeks followed a similar routine. However, in the middle of one week, my wife called me because the dishwasher had broken down, and she asked me to come and fix it. When I arrived at the house to repair the dishwasher, I was surprised. The living room looked completely different. The only times I visited the house were to pick up my kids in the driveway and grab my tools for side jobs. My tools are stored in the basement, and I usually use the basement entrance without entering the main living area. While fixing the dishwasher, I noticed that my wife had redecorated the living room. She had changed the curtains and bought a new couch. I asked her what was going on, and she explained that she wanted to make some changes. After fixing the dishwasher, I took the opportunity to get some things from the master bedroom and noticed that my wife had purchased many new outfits. When we talked about it, she mentioned that she had started going to the gym to get in better shape and work on self-improvement. I admit feeling a bit envious that she was making all these efforts to better herself, and I wondered if all these renovations were her way of moving on. For me, I kept doubting whether leaving the house was the right decision, even though I knew it was for my peace of mind. After about 2 weeks, as the weather got colder, my wife informed me that there was an issue with the furnace. I came over to fix it and noticed more changes to the house. I hadn't seen my wife up close since I repaired the dishwasher. When I saw her waiting in the driveway with my daughters, she was always in baggy pajamas, so I couldn't tell she had lost some weight. I mentioned it, and she explained it was her self-improvement month. We talked, and I got the feeling she wasn't as interested in me moving back. Why would she be? She still sees me as the handyman. I'm taking care of the kids and contributing financially. I'm still paying my share of the mortgage, and she gets the benefits of having a man around without having to cook or be intimate with me. It's like she's enjoying the best of both worlds. I informed my wife about the upcoming hunting trip to Montana, expecting her to object or raise concerns like it's dangerous or expensive, but she didn't object, ask questions, or show any resistance. She was surprisingly easy to talk to, and that made me uneasy. I thought maybe she had moved on and didn't care if I returned or not. That's the vibe I got from her. 2 weeks later, I went on the hunting trip with my friends, returned a week later, and picked up my daughters for school. That Monday, as I pulled into the driveway and opened the car door for my daughters, they seemed thrilled to see me. However, my 5-year-old asked if they were getting a new daddy, which struck me as a strange question. I reassured her that I wasn't going anywhere and asked why she thought they were getting a new daddy. She said there was a guy who stayed at the house while I was away. I initially thought my daughter might have mistaken the man for my brother-in-law who used to stay with us. However, my daughter knows my brother-in-law well enough not to confuse him with someone else. I even asked her if she meant Uncle Jamie, but she insisted that the man's name was Jacob, a name I'd never heard before. I couldn't access my wife's social media or texts because she changed her passwords when I moved out. The name Jacob consumed my thoughts for the rest of the day as I tried to recall if my wife had never mentioned him before. Before my hunting trip, I noticed my wife was no longer enthusiastic about reconciling. She just wanted me to be there and fix things. I began to assume the worst-case scenario, that what my daughter said was true, and there was a man named Jacob involved with my wife romantically. I thought that if I acted unsure about Jacob, it would allow my wife to deny any knowledge of him, similar to her denials on the footage where she tried to deny anything was happening and gaslighted me. So I decided to visit her that evening while my kids were asleep. I wanted to surprise her by showing up unannounced, but she didn't seem surprised, perhaps because she expected me due to my recent out-of-town trips. Our relationship remained cordial, although I sensed that the idea of reconciliation was losing momentum. We still operated under the impression that we should reconcile. I had the keys to the house, so I let myself in. When she saw me, she asked if I was hungry, but I declined, expressing my desire to talk. We sat in the living room, and I confronted her straight away about what I knew regarding Jacob and why she was having an affair when we had agreed to work on reconciliation. I observed her body language closely to gauge her reaction. She ran her fingers through her hair nervously, a sign that she knew she had been caught. Swiftly, she lifted her head and explained that Jacob was a coworker. They had a close working relationship, and since I wasn't around, she had called him for help with household chores. I pressed her further, asking if this help extended to sharing our bedroom. She gave me a strange look, and in a raised voice, I demanded an answer. She admitted that they had slept together twice, claiming there was nothing more. I didn't buy her story about just 2 times. I knew there was much more to it. I asked her how long this relationship had been going on, and she initially tried to deflect by saying that if I hadn't left her and the kids, this wouldn't have happened. I sensed she was avoiding the question, so I raised my voice again, insisting she answer. That's when she confessed they'd been emotionally involved for over a year, and it had recently become physical. I reminded her that I had suspected something was amiss back when we were in marriage counseling, which was why she wanted to stop it. The therapist had seen through her lies and wanted her to come clean. In hindsight, I realized that I may have been deceived all along. I should have recognized that our relationship was built on a shaky foundation, as I didn't truly know who she was. I wonder how long their affair has been going on. I've read enough about infidelity to understand that a woman who had multiple encounters at a bachelorette party wouldn't be content with a simple, ordinary relationship like ours. I couldn't believe her claim that the physical affair only occurred during my absence and because I was away. I sensed there was more to the story. I asked her how she thought we could proceed with reconciliation if she had been involved with this guy for who knows how many years. She didn't correct me, indicating that it was clearly more than the 2 times she admitted. She confessed uncertainty about her feelings for him. When I calmly asked if she loved him, I saw a brief hesitation in her demeanor. I stood up from the couch and told her it was time to stop playing games. I pointed out that a woman who had closeness with 2 dancers and engaged in such behavior in front of friends wouldn't have done it just once. I expressed my relief that she was happy with this guy and stated that I now had valid reasons for legal separation. I acknowledged that we had a good run with our 2 beautiful daughters and suggested that it was time to call it quits. I used to wonder if I made the right decision by moving out, but now I'm certain I did the right thing by giving her the chance to make her mistakes. If I had accepted her lies and gaslighting all these years, I might have lived my life in ignorance. I owe some credit to the marriage therapist for opening my eyes. Even though she didn't explicitly say my wife was lying, I was sharp enough to read between the lines of her questions and understand her perspective. It was like one dishonest person recognizing another, and I was just a learner in their midst. At that moment, I realized my wife was skilled at covering her tracks. I still had a feeling there was more to the story, and I suspected she was withholding something. When I got up from the couch to leave, she told me she still loved me, but I ignored her and walked away. I went home that day upset because I knew I wouldn't be able to see my kids as often as I'd like. I understood there was no turning back from this, but at the same time, I felt a strange sense of relief because I had been proven right, and her true colors as a cheater had been revealed. It's eerie how accurate that quote about cheaters holds. I'm not a religious person, but I slept well that night, feeling like the universe was on my side. Throughout this experience, it seemed like everything fell into place systematically to unveil the lie I had been living. Just think if my friend hadn't told me about the video. All these events over the past few months wouldn't have occurred to open my eyes to the reality of who I've been living with for the past 6 years. I called my dad the next day to share everything I had just discovered, and he reassured me that I handled things well. He told me not to blame myself because it wasn't my fault and that everything happens for a reason, bringing what was hidden into the open. Right now, my primary concern is the safety of my daughters. I need to know who the man my wife has introduced to them is. You've probably heard about individuals who date single moms with daughters for harmful reasons, and I wouldn't forgive myself if something like that happened to my kids. The next day, I picked up my children from school as usual. My wife called me to discuss our situation and mentioned she still wanted to reconcile with me, promising to cut off contact with the other man. I reminded her that she'd been in a relationship with him for years, so that wasn't the main issue anymore. For the first time, she challenged my belief that their relationship had been ongoing for years, claiming it only became physical recently when I abandoned her and the children. I saw this as an obvious attempt to deflect the blame, and I wasn't buying it. I pointed out that while we were supposed to be working on reconciliation, she had engaged in a physical relationship and even invited the man into our marital home. Instead of seeking revenge, I believed the right thing to do now was to get a divorce and focus on our daughters because she had already given up on our relationship a long time ago. She responded by blaming me for giving up when I left home, and I hung up the phone to avoid arguing with her. Despite her beauty, I knew she wouldn't struggle to find another man, possibly even better than me. I hoped she would find someone better for the sake of my daughter, as the worst-case scenario would be if she were having encounters with random men in my house, putting my daughters in danger. The next day, I reached out to one of her coworkers who had worked with my wife for 2 years at the hospital, as well as at her previous job. I called her unexpectedly and explained that I had recently suffered a work-related injury and needed a male physical therapist. I mentioned that my wife had recommended someone named Jacob and asked if she knew anything about him. I framed it this way because I knew she was knowledgeable about the workplace. She replied that she didn't know any Jacob, and the only Jacob she was aware of had been one of my wife's former clients at their previous job. I thanked her and ended the call. I realized that my question to her had been somewhat deceptive, and she might eventually ask my wife about it. So I decided to confront my wife about her obvious lie regarding Jacob being her coworker. I couldn't wait to discuss this with her in person. Moreover, there was no telling when her coworker might call her and inform her about the strange call she received from me, her husband. Therefore, I acted promptly by calling my wife to address the issue. I asked her why she had lied to me about the identity of her affair partner, pointing out that Jacob had been her client for more than 2 years and she had lied about it. I told her it was my right to know that she wasn't bringing home strangers and potential dangers to our daughters. She responded by saying that Jacob wasn't a dangerous person. He was a widower and a businessman who owned several hotels in the area. She claimed he was a clean and trustworthy person she had known for years, and he had been her client when his wife tragically passed away. She mentioned they had good chemistry but couldn't pursue anything due to her marriage. However, when I left them, she decided to give it a try. Interestingly, she kept trying to shift the blame onto me while also admitting her own fault in the same sentence. After my call with my wife's coworker, I strongly suspected that my wife had been involved in a physical relationship with one of her wealthier former clients for well over 2 years, or possibly more. I decided to do a background check on him, and thankfully, he doesn't seem to have a history of criminal activity. I'd be dishonest if I didn't admit feeling a bit envious because this man was more successful than me. However, I also realized the importance of uncovering the truth about my wife continuing her secretive affairs after the Bachelorette incident. It was crucial for me to start fresh. Some of you might suggest a DNA test for my daughters, but I don't think it's necessary because they resemble me. To keep it short, 2 months later, we got a divorce, and I sold the house, splitting the proceeds. My wife moved in with her affair partner, who owns multiple properties, although his main residence is 50 miles away. I too relocated to another city for a new beginning. I found a better paying job and rented a condo with enough space to store my work. Equipment. Despite the challenges of adapting to a new area and securing contracts, I welcomed the opportunity. Although I miss taking my kids to daycare every day, we share custody of my daughters, and I get to see them every other week. Life after divorce isn't as bad as I thought, and the custody arrangement provides me with time to pursue my hobbies. I haven't ventured into dating, as I've been quite focused on work, and I don't foresee entering a long-term relationship anytime soon.
Story 3.
Arthur, are you listening?
You just need to sign the papers and we're finished." My wife, Annie, whom I've been married to for over 25 years, was speaking to me. I tried to pay attention, but her voice seemed to drift further away as her rant continued. It all began this afternoon when I came home from work. Annie sat at the table with a glass of wine and a determined expression. Unfortunately, she only had one glass, neglecting to consider if I might want one too, especially given the direction our conversation was taking. I sensed trouble brewing as I sat down. Without asking about my day, Annie plunged into the news that she was leaving me. She claimed to have found her soulmate, someone who made her happier than I ever did, rendering me no longer adequate. Despite her escalating volume, her words became increasingly distant to me. Our story followed a familiar pattern. We met in high school, stayed together, and welcomed our daughter Sally shortly after getting married. While she wasn't the primary reason we tied the knot, she was always part of the plan. Presently, we both held steady jobs, lived comfortably, and had managed to pay off our house, with some savings to boot. We frequently professed our love, took family vacations, and though our physical closeness had waned over time, we still found moments of closeness. I believed our love ran deep, and we were destined to grow old together until this afternoon. Annie's rant continued, her face reddening with each passing moment. "Arthur, look at me!" It became increasingly difficult to focus, but I turned towards her. "You need to sign these papers." She pointed adamantly at the documents before me. Her tone was demanding, yet I struggled to maintain concentration. It felt as though the room's brightness and color were fading, despite the kitchen lights being on. Internally, I was fraught with emotion, but externally, my body remained unresponsive. The longer I remained silent, the angrier Annie grew. The last thing I remember is her slap, though I couldn't feel the impact. I imagined it leaving a prominent red mark, but still I couldn't move, and the world seemed to darken around me.
It had been a long day. The drive home from university was delayed due to an accident slowing everyone down. When I arrived home, there was an eerie quietness in the house. The lights were on, Dad's car was in the driveway, but Mom's was nowhere to be seen. Upon entering the kitchen, I threw my bag and books on the ground. Dad sat at the table, motionless, staring into space. On the table lay an open bottle of Mom's wine and a mostly empty glass. In front of Dad were papers with numerous "Sign Here" tabs. Approaching Dad, I touched his shoulder from behind. "Hey, Dad." I anticipated a response, but he remained unresponsive. Walking around to face him, I was taken aback. His eyes appeared glazed, almost milky white, with traces of tears staining his cheeks. He wasn't blinking, and a trail of drool hung from his mouth, threatening to drip into his lap. Panicked, I called out, "Dad! Dad! Come back to me, Dad!" Tears welled in my eyes. With no response from Dad, I tried to calm myself. "Slow down, Sally. Dad needs help," I whispered to myself. Retrieving my phone, I dialed emergency. I explained that my father, Arthur Other, was unresponsive. After providing my details and address, they dispatched an ambulance, promising a 10-minute arrival time. I sat beside Dad, holding his hand, offering reassurance. This man had been my everything growing up. Despite his demanding job, he always made time for my school events, musicals, and ballet. He endured my early attempts at the violin, encouraging me every step of the way. On my 16th birthday, he surprised me with a Heidersign violin, not the best, but it held sentimental value as it came from him. Now, 5 years later, I was studying music at university with a focus on strings and violin, thanks to his unwavering support. As I waited, questions raced through my mind. Why was Dad like this? What had happened? And where was Mom? Glancing at the paperwork on the table, the words "petition for divorce" caught my eye. Shocked, I began reading, my skin crawling at the revelation that Mom wanted to divorce Dad for reasons unknown to me. It appeared highly likely that Dad's condition stemmed from the documents, especially considering Mom's open wine bottle, indicating she had given Dad the papers and left. People often speculate on the rapid fluctuation of emotions. I suppose they've never experienced such a betrayal. For me, any compassion and desire to be in my mother's presence faded away. Shortly after, the ambulance arrived, and I directed them in getting Dad onto a gurney and off to the hospital. After locking up the house, I followed behind, making calls as I drove. I contacted my grandmother, Dad's mom, his sister Rhonda, his best friend, and then his manager at work, informing them of Dad's situation and his impending absence. I explained that I found him unresponsive and that he was en route to the hospital. Everyone requested updates on his condition, and his manager assured me of arranging emergency leave and informing their boss. I knew I was putting off the next call, consumed with anger, but I felt compelled to call Mom. The phone rang, and she answered after a couple of rings. "Hi, Sally, my darling, how was your day?" I was taken aback by her casual tone. Surely she couldn't be so naive as to think I wouldn't know what was happening. It had been almost an hour since I found Dad, and Mom was well aware of my routine. "Where are you, Mom?" "I'm out and about, sweetie," she trailed off, sensing my inquiry. "So, in other words, you've just shattered my father, your husband, and left him without a second thought?" "Oh, no, darling, I tried to explain to your father about Paul and the situation, but he wasn't responsive, so I thought it best to leave and let him process that we won't be living with him anymore." Her attempt to downplay the situation infuriated me. Given Dad's state, it seemed more likely that she had ripped his heart out and left it shattered before him. "It appears to me like you abandoned him when he needed help. Are you truly that heartless? Do you even understand what's happening now, or do you simply not care?" Anger began to seep into my voice. "Sweetie, don't get angry now. I understand this is a shock, but your father will be fine. I'm only asking for what is rightfully mine and some support while Paul and I wait to marry." Yep, my mother was firmly in La-La Land. "Angry? You haven't seen angry yet, Mother. And just so you know, I'm currently following Dad to the hospital. He's in an ambulance, and when I got home, he looked like he'd had a stroke." "Oh, Sally, my sweetie, I'm sorry to hear that, but—" "No excuses, Mother. Let me ask you, is this Paul you're running off with the same Paul from your work that you keep talking about?" She hesitated. "Of course, darling. Paul, the man from my mother's workplace she never stopped mentioning. So, let me get this straight. He's a dozen years younger than you, and you've been having an affair with him for how long?" Again, she hesitated. 6 months. "Right. So for the last 6 months, you've been involved with someone from your workplace behind Dad's back. You've been lying to Dad and me, hiding your affair. I had no idea you were capable of such deceit, and clearly neither did Dad, judging by the state you left him in. How did you expect either of us to react?" "Well, I suppose not positively at first, but once we're living with Paul, you'll see we're meant to be together." "We?" She had just referred to we for the second time. Did she expect me to abandon Dad to move in with her and her boyfriend? I could feel my anger boiling over. I knew I would say something regrettable if I didn't stop. I'm going to hang up now before I say something I might regret. But let me be crystal clear. I will not be leaving Dad, and there's no way I'm going anywhere near Paul, let alone moving into the place you and he are cavorting in." "Sally Other," my mother responded sharply. "I am your mother, and I will not be spoken to like that, regardless of how upset you are." "Then I guess we're done talking." I hung up before she could say anything else. If she thought I would condone what she was doing, she had another thing coming. She tried calling me back multiple times, then started calling Dad's phone, which was silly because if he could, I doubted he would pick up a call from her. Since I had Dad's phone with me, I ignored any calls from her. By the time I reached the hospital, the ambulance crew had admitted Dad, and he was in a ward under observation. Aunt Rhonda had arrived and informed me that she had also received several calls from my mother, but wasn't sure what was happening other than her brother being in the hospital. When I explained the situation, Aunt Rhonda turned a deep shade of scarlet, almost as if steam were coming out of her ears. "Sally, do you have the documents that woman left for my brother?" "Sure, Aunt Rhonda. Here you go." Aside from being my aunt, Rhonda was also our family attorney. For the next hour, we sat beside Dad as Rhonda read through the documents, occasionally muttering under her breath. Doctors and nurses came in and out of the room periodically, checking on Dad. "Well, the bad news is that your mother is going to get her divorce from your father. The schedule outlined here shows that this process has been in motion for over 2 months and had to be served this week, or it would have incurred significantly higher fees from her legal team." I shrugged. I had heard enough justification from my mother. I was determined to ensure that she and Dad separated for what she had done. It was strange. I was never particularly close to my father, always looking up to my mom, but her actions seemed plain foolish. This whole mess seemed to be orchestrated by Paul, her so-called soulmate. Regardless, Mom and Dad weren't going to weather this storm, especially if Dad's current condition was any indication. The good news is that she hired a shyster of a lawyer to represent her. She's going to have to shell out a hefty sum just for the divorce, and even more if it goes to court. Rhonda grinned. Meanwhile, my dear brother has the best lawyer in town, and he's getting the family discount. We shared a smile for the first time that evening. Additionally, some of the claims here, like wanting 50% equity in the house and 60% of the financial assets, along with spousal and child maintenance, are likely quite exaggerated. I assume from your reaction that you're not planning to live with your mother. I shook my head in confirmation. Good. Okay. I have some initial thoughts. However, we need to see what happens with your dad over the next 24 hours. Your mother could already be in hot water for abandonment and mental cruelty. The next few days flew by, with doctors constantly checking on Dad. Physically, he was fine and healthy, but he remained unresponsive. I managed to continue my university studies in the hospital chair by his bed, laptop and textbook in hand. Occasionally, a family member would relieve me, allowing me to go home, catch a few hours of sleep, and return. I'll admit, I shed a few tears at home, alone in the house. One of the most surprising moments during Dad's hospital stay was when Tina Williams, the owner of the company where Dad worked, paid him a visit. While I knew Dad's manager, Tom, I had never met Tina herself. Tina was a striking woman, curvaceous without being overweight, with tan skin, dark raven hair, and mesmerizing blue eyes that could make any person, male or female, swoon. As it turned out, Dad had been part of a group at his workplace that had supported Tina a few years back during her messy divorce. Her unfaithful ex-husband had attempted to claim a significant portion of their savings and nearly succeeded in taking half of her business. Dad had introduced her to Aunt Rhonda, who had successfully protected Tina's assets, ensuring she didn't lose any business shares and securing child support for her then 6-year-old daughter. Tina visited Dad several times, expressing shock when I briefed her on the general summary of why he was hospitalized. She brought cards from everyone at Dad's workplace and spent time holding his hand, sharing stories from the office. It turned out Dad had a knack for humor in the workplace, and his absence was deeply felt by his colleagues. I should mention that Dad is an accountant by profession, working for one of the financial clearinghouses that assist banks in processing payments to financial institutions. While the work may be tedious, Dad apparently brightened up the workday for everyone with his humor and presence. About 2 weeks later, I returned from a shower and a nap at home to find Rhonda and Tina in the midst of a conversation. Although it seemed a bit heated, their frustration was aimed at my mother rather than each other. It turned out that my mother had sent a demand letter to Tina, requesting access to all of Dad's bonuses from the past few years. It didn't matter that the bonuses had already been paid out. The letter demanded that she receive 50% of them within 30 days into a designated bank account, or she would pursue legal action against Tina. Besides the absurdity of her claim for money already dispersed, it seems like she and her new partner are in dire financial straits since I've frozen all the joint assets while Arthur is incapacitated. Rhonda remarked, sporting an exploitative grin. I chuckled, making my presence known. Yes. This morning I received my first communication from Mom in 2 weeks. A text message asking if I could lend her a few $1,000s. I haven't responded because I'm still pretty upset with her. I mean, she hasn't even asked about Dad since I told her what she did to him. Over the past couple of weeks, Tina had become fiercely protective of my dad. Whenever my mother was brought up, Tina's eyes narrowed, her voice dropping in pitch, indicating her deep disdain for Annie Uther. It was as if I could see sparks flickering around her smoldering eyes. I just hoped she never had to be in the same room with my mother, otherwise I feared she might incinerate her on the spot. Despite my current feelings toward my mother, she was still my mother. She has destroyed the most wonderful man. Sally, if it weren't for your father, I wouldn't have my Clarice or my business. So many people in the office helped me during one of the lowest points in my life, but your father took the time to listen to me. He never judged my ex-husband or me. He just let me talk. No one has ever done that without offering an opinion. He introduced me to your aunt here, ensuring I was taken care of. If he were single, I would have pursued him with everything I had after my divorce. I shrugged and let a smile grace my face. He won't be married much longer. Their faces registered realization, and Rhonda giggled while Tina smiled. Thanks, Sally. I needed that. I still can't believe what your mother has done to him or that she discarded such an amazing man. I need to head back to the office, but before I do... Tina walked over to my dad, and as Rhonda and I watched, she bent down and gave him a tender but sincere kiss on the lips. She looked up at us and smiled. However, her smile quickly turned into shock when my dad emitted a groan.
As I gradually woke up, I sensed soft lips on mine, just the right amount of pressure, conveying a gentle and tender affection I hadn't felt in a long time. The hospital room's beeping and my groans reminded me of my surroundings. Anticipating Annie's presence as I opened my eyes after that affectionate kiss, I was surprised to find Tina standing there with a smile on her face. "Tina?" Approaching from the other side of the bed, Sally and Rhonda joined us. "It's okay, Daddy. You're going to be okay, you hear?" As my memories caught up with me, I realized Annie was leaving me or had already left. What happened? Over the next few minutes, the three of them filled me in on how Sally had found me unresponsive, called an ambulance, and discovered the divorce papers, revealing Annie's months-long infidelity. I learned how Annie had threatened Tina once Rhonda froze our finances until they could determine my condition. "How long?" 2 weeks, Arthur," Rhonda replied. I turned to Tina. You kissed me?" Tina blushed. "Yeah, sorry, I was about to head back to the office and was saying goodbye." I smiled. "No, it's okay. I guess I'm on the market, so I think it's okay." Over the next few hours, various doctors came through, conducting physical checkups, blood tests, and more. Tina canceled her visit to the office and stayed, along with Rhonda and Sally. Among the doctors was a psychologist. As he probed into my experiences, I recounted finding Annie alone, drinking, and her announcement of leaving me. I described how the world seemed to lose color, and sensory input became disjointed, making it difficult to move despite growing upset. My last memory was of Annie slapping and yelling at me, her words incomprehensible. The girls collectively gasped at the revelation of Annie's aggression, while I was unable to respond. "Dad, what time do you think it was when you became unresponsive?" "I'd say it was around 5:30, baby." "Why?" "Because it was past 7:30 when I got home and found you, and there was no red mark on your cheek. So I assume Mom must have left you there alone for quite some time." The psychologist interjected. "It's not uncommon for someone in your situation to experience misuse while unresponsive. In your case, I'd say you went into shock upon hearing your wife's declaration of leaving you. Although this is a much more extreme case than usual, it does make sense." Rhonda added, "When Arthur was young, there was a bully a few years older than him. He teased Arthur quite a bit, and one day a neighborhood parent found Arthur lying on the ground in a local park. Our parents put him to bed, and he woke up the next morning. It wasn't overthought, as he woke up regularly the next day, but it did happen. I remember Billy pushing me around and teasing me in the park. After a while, I didn't know what happened, but when I woke up, Mom and Dad told me I had passed out and someone brought me home. When I told them about Billy, they spoke to his parents. The next day, Billy came up to me at school and apologized. I chuckled at the memory. I don't think he was sincere, but he never bothered me again after that day. "I believe we may have a precedent here," the psychologist mentioned. "In many ways, the mind remains poorly understood. However, if something similar has occurred before, it's plausible it could happen again." I frowned. He reassured. "I wouldn't worry too much. With the love and attention of these three lovely ladies, even if something were to happen again, I believe you will be well taken care of." We conversed for a few more minutes before he excused himself. I also found myself fatigued, which might seem odd for someone who had just slept for the past 2 weeks. But I was. So I sent all three girls home to rest, and informed them they could visit me tomorrow to ensure I was all right. Over the next 2 days, I eased back into life. Tina brought me a work laptop and a few simple tasks to complete with instructions, only if I felt bored. Rhonda visited primarily to review her revised divorce documents and to have me sign some papers so she could proceed with ending my marriage to Annie. Rhonda also brought along a young detective, Karen Hill. Detective Hill conducted an hour-long interview with me regarding my experience that night with Annie. She thanked me and informed Rhonda and me that her report would be ready in a few days. I wasn't certain if we were planning to file a complaint against Annie. Eventually, however, Rhonda instructed me to leave everything to her, kissed me on the forehead, and departed. On the second day afternoon, after waking up from what Sally dubbed my checkout, I was discharged to return home. Sally accompanied me, and I was surprised to find Tina waiting at the door. She assisted Sally in guiding me to her large suburban SUV. Tina stayed for dinner that night. We opted for takeout, and she pitched in to clean up before staying to watch TV with us for a couple of hours. When she left, Sally hugged her and made sure I walked her to her car. "Tina, thank you so much for everything you've done these past few weeks. I don't know how I can repay you." "Well, in a few weeks, when you're feeling back on your game, you can take me out for dinner and dancing." I blushed. Here I was, just an afternoon out of the hospital, and the woman whose kiss had awakened me was asking me out. But she was attractive, and according to Annie, I was to be a single man again. "Okay, next Friday night after work. That gives me almost 2 weeks to get myself back to normal." She nodded and gave me a warm hug. It lingered a little longer, and I sensed a deeper meaning. As she got into her car, I found it amusing that for a moment I wondered about the name of the woman I had been married to for almost 25 years. For the next few days, Sally, Rhonda, and Tina hovered around me, ensuring I was all right. It was comforting to be cared for in such a way. However, the news Rhonda brought me that Friday afternoon caught all of us a little off guard. "This afternoon, Annie got arrested," she announced. "What happened?" I inquired. "Well, after your statement to the police at the hospital, they issued an arrest warrant for Annie on grounds of mental cruelty to a person with a disability. This is because you were mentally disabled and unable to defend yourself at the time. Also, she left you unattended for an unspecified period, which adds to her troubles," she explained. "What does this mean for the divorce?" Tina, who had joined us again for dinner, asked. That evening, she had her 8-year-old daughter Clarice with her, who was watching a Disney movie in the lounge room while we conversed. With Monday marking my return to work, Tina would see me then. However, I was starting to grasp that she was seeking more than just an efficient number cruncher in the office. I found myself not objecting to the idea of Tina and picturing her, contemplating what lay beneath those nicely fitting clothes she wore whenever she visited. Rhonda grinned. "It's likely going to tilt a few things in Arthur's favor. I'm advocating for a 50-50 split of the bank accounts in the house. I know we could aim for more given the circumstances, but I reckon Arthur would want to be fair." I nodded. "Annie won't be able to touch any of the bonus money she tried to extract from you, Tina. I filed a case against her for extortion alongside the mental cruelty charge. It won't do much except prevent her from accessing what isn't rightfully hers. She'll probably be out in a couple of days, none the worse for wear, and likely back with her wretched soulmate. What I aim to do is expedite the divorce using Arthur's hospitalization and recovery as a pretext. Then, depending on her reaction, I have plans in motion. I'll ensure Arthur doesn't lose anything he shouldn't," she said, smiling. "So, how long will the divorce take, Aunt Rhonda?" Sally inquired. "Assuming everything goes smoothly, it should take around 3 months. After that, if Annie decides to contest anything, I'll bring in reinforcements, which will prolong the process but inflict more damage on her," Rhonda explained. That evening, as I escorted Tina to her car, Sally assisted Clarice into the back seat of the large Suburban. Tina embraced me once again and surprised me with a quick kiss, reminiscent of the other day. "Arthur, I know you're married, and you're a man of honor, so I won't rush things. But I want to lay claim to you now and let you know that I desire you. I've wanted you for a long time, of course, but I'd never pursue a married man or disrespect someone's marital vows. I've experienced that myself, and I wouldn't want to inflict that on someone else, even if their marriage is in trouble," Tina expressed sincerely. For a moment, I gazed into her deep blue eyes, brushed a strand of her dark hair from her face, and then leaned in to kiss her. Instead of a tender kiss, it became one filled with passion, lasting perhaps 30 seconds. I sensed the mutual connection between us. When I pulled back, Tina's eyes were closed, and she ran her tongue over her lips, savoring our kiss. I grinned. "Consider that my acknowledgement of your claim." We glanced at the girls, both of them giggling at our kiss. Clarice was clapping, and Sally sported a huge grin. As Tina and Clarice drove off, Sally hugged me and we waved goodbye. The following months were quite a ride. On one hand, Annie wanted a speedy divorce, but on the other, she wasn't content with the settlement. It seemed Paul was calling the shots, convincing her she deserved the lion's share of the assets. He was feeding her lies, and deep down, she must have realized it after so many years of marriage. As her settlement demands grew more absurd, Rhonda had a single conversation with Annie's lawyer, and whatever was said put an end to all objections overnight. Tina and I went on dates every Friday night while Sally began babysitting Clarice, picking her up from school and looking after her, giving Tina and me time for dinner, coffee, and entertainment. Though we never went beyond holding hands and kissing, I had a feeling the night my divorce finalized would be unforgettable. Back at work now, things were going smoothly. While we were a successful financial organization, we weren't in the big leagues. We all did our jobs, were well compensated, and enjoyed each other's company. I think the staff caught on to Tina and me becoming an item at some point. Although everyone was happy for us, I had to dial back my usual antics. My direct manager, who reported to Tina, made sure to remind me of appropriate workplace behavior, considering I was essentially dating his boss. About 3.5 months later, we received a notification that the divorce would be finalized 1 week from the upcoming Thursday. There were no court proceedings. However, Annie had requested a meeting to discuss matters before the final decree. I agreed to meet the day before, and we arranged for her to visit the house to speak with both Sally and me. I had taken the afternoon off from work and prepared lamb chops and gnocchi in a burnt butter sauce for the three of us. It was a favorite meal for all of us, and I hoped it would help ease any potential awkwardness during our conversation that evening. Sally arrived home around 5:30, went to shower and change, and just before 6, the doorbell rang, signaling Annie's arrival at the front door. I haven't described Annie's appearance in some time, but perhaps I should now, with a before and after perspective. Before everything unfolded a few months ago, Annie was an attractive mid-40s housewife. She had cropped, shoulder-length brown hair, a curvy figure typical of a mother, and although carrying a few extra pounds, she was still quite attractive. With a well-proportioned 34C bust and an appealing rear, she was an attractive wife. Unfortunately, the woman standing before me now was almost unrecognizable. Annie had gained a significant amount of weight, developed jowls under her chin and puffy cheeks. Her stomach, which had previously had a slight mom belly, now sagged over her pants, and her once curvy posterior had expanded. Furthermore, she was dressed in loose-fitting clothes that concealed even more. Now, I have nothing against people of larger size, but that wasn't the Annie I knew. I think my surprise at her physical transformation was evident on my face, although Annie made no comment about it, merely grimacing in response. Hello, Annie. Please come in," I greeted as we entered the kitchen. I offered her a glass of wine, which she accepted, and we engaged in small talk for a few minutes. She inquired about work and my well-being, while I skipped the inquiry about her health. "It's what Paul wants. He didn't like how thin I was, so we've been working on bulking me up," she addressed the unspoken question. I frowned. For over 25 years, I had cherished this woman. Despite her actions, a lingering concern for her health remained, albeit greatly diminished. "You don't approve, do you?" She looked at me. "No, Annie, I don't. When we were together, you were a healthy size. But I'll be honest, I'm taken aback by your appearance. You don't seem well, and if I weren't so hurt by what you did, I'd be more concerned about your health and try to help," I expressed. "But you don't care, do you?" Her expression fell. "You and Sally, you're happy and healthy without me here." "Well, there's a part of me that cares, but when you walked out of here and practically left me for dead," I trailed off, shrugging while she sighed. "I deserve that. I did a terrible thing, didn't I?" "No, Mother," Sally interjected, appearing fresh from the shower. "You did a freaking horrible thing. You single-handedly tore apart a happy family, then walked out without a care in the world. And I, for one, can't understand why Dad agreed to let you come here tonight." "Sally, calm down," I intervened. "Your mother knows the situation we're in and how unhappy we all are. She requested this meeting tonight, so I thought the least we could do is be mature and hear her out." Sally wasn't pleased. As far as I could tell, like me, she hadn't spoken to her mother since that momentous day. The way my daughter was glaring at her mother, this situation wouldn't end well for anyone. It was time to steer the conversation elsewhere. Attempting a cheerful tone, I suggested, "Tough discussions aren't ideal right before dinner, so let's eat first." I served dinner, and though no one spoke, there were numerous glances exchanged across the table. Sally maintained a steady glare at her mother throughout the meal. After dinner, I cleared the table, and Annie requested to speak to Sally alone. "No way! You can say whatever you want to me with both of us present," Sally retorted firmly. I felt torn, but it was evident Sally was resolute about not being left alone with her mother. Annie seemed to sense that too. The look in her eyes mirrored what her mother had done to me on that fateful night. She acquiesced. Annie took a deep breath, hesitant to discuss matters in front of me, but she addressed Sally. "Well, Sally, I wanted to ask for your forgiveness for what happened that night. I didn't handle things properly, and despite everything, I don't want to estrange my daughter forever." Glancing at me, Annie added, "There's more, but I'd prefer to discuss it in private without your father present." "Sorry, Mom, but if you can't say it to both of us, then I don't want to hear it," Sally declared. Before Annie could respond, Sally stood up and left the room, slamming her bedroom door shut moments later. "I hope that would go better," Annie murmured softly, more to herself than to me. "I think considering the circumstances, it went rather smoothly," I replied, letting her know I understood. "Really?" Annie sounded surprised. "Yes, really," I sighed, continuing. "Annie, you need to realize that at this moment, nobody in this house holds much affection for you." She started to reply, but I raised my hand, signaling her to let me finish and lay everything out. "First, you engage in a long-term carnal affair with someone, then conceal it from both Sally and me. Next, you serve me with divorce papers out of the blue, and when I enter what Sally refers to as checkout mode, you proceed to yell, scream, and then slap me." Annie appeared stunned, like a deer caught in headlights. "Yes, I remember that, and I recall most of that time until shortly after you first slapped me. But let's continue. At some point, you abandon me when I am unresponsive, leaving me there until Sally arrives home and discovers me in the same state," I recounted. Annie's expression turned to panic. "When Sally calls you, you show no concern for me despite your daughter being visibly distressed about her father. You never once inquire about my well-being until tonight, make unreasonable demands of my workplace, and upon entering here, it's still all about you. You ask Sally for forgiveness, yet you have not apologized to her at any point." I paused briefly, hoping my words would resonate. "Yes, Annie, with all of that considered, I think things went quite well." Annie's gaze shifted to the floor, tears welling in her eyes. They hadn't yet fallen, but they lingered threateningly. I couldn't discern whether they were for Sally, myself, or simply a reflection of her own emotions. Continuing, I stated, "Now our divorce will be finalized tomorrow, and unless you have anything further to add, I believe we have fulfilled your request for a final meeting." I walked to the door and opened it. Annie glanced at me before exiting. Once outside, she turned to look at me. "Arthur, we did have some good years, didn't we?" "Yes, Annie, most of our time together was incredible. You were an exceptional lover, a devoted wife, and a loving mother. I'm not sure what this Paul character has done to you, but I don't see the woman I fell in love with in the person standing before me. All I see is someone who seems lost, manipulated into becoming overweight, self-centered, and caring more about what others can provide for you than the people themselves." Once again, she lowered her gaze to her feet. "You truly mean that, don't you, Arthur?" "Yes, I do," I affirmed. She turned to leave but hesitated, looking utterly broken this time. "Arthur, about the house. Paul told me I needed to ask." So that was the purpose of her visit. It wasn't about reconnecting with her family. It was solely about money. I chuckled, leaving Annie puzzled by my reaction. "Go tell your soulmate that you'll have your share of the savings and the equity from this house transferred to the bank account your lawyer provided to Rhonda by this time tomorrow. And Annie," she glanced at me, "protect that money from Paul or you won't have it for long. Update." The next morning marked the final decree, and Annie and I were officially no longer husband and wife. There was a small twinge of sadness within me, but it was fleeting. Mostly I felt content. The past few months had been challenging for everyone. Now, at 48 years old, I felt liberated, knowing I still had much life left to live. Rhonda phoned to inform me that pizza was on her tonight at my place. During lunch at the office, Sally dropped by. We reminisced about happier times with her mother when we were a complete family. Despite Sally's dislike for her mother, I could sense she missed the woman she once was. Truthfully, I did too. We shared many good years together. As Sally left, there seemed to be a silent exchange between her and Tina. Not long after, I was summoned to Tina's office. She closed the door and then kissed me passionately, as if the sun might never rise again. I must admit, I responded in kind. "Can I claim you as mine now, Arthur?" Tina asked. I felt a sore spot on my neck, likely from a bruise forming where she had just kissed me moments before. I think you may have already done that. That evening's dinner was delightful, with Sally, Rhonda, Tina, and Clarice all joining in to celebrate my newfound freedom from Annie. Later that Friday night, after the girls were in bed, Tina and I consummated our relationship. I must have done something right because throughout the weekend, Tina seemed a bit sore whenever she sat down, but her eyes burned with a fiery passion that I knew was reserved for me alone. 6 months later, we tied the knot in a beautiful ceremony by a local lake, with many of our colleagues in attendance. Though we initially planned to marry later, we decided to move the date up to coincide with the arrival of Sally and Clarice's new little brother. Update. 5 years had passed, and Sally, her boyfriend Tina, and I were enjoying dinner at a local restaurant when 5-year-old Keegan posed a question. "Daddy, who is that lady who keeps staring at us?" Turning to look, we spotted Annie sitting across the room. She had noticeably lost weight and appeared discontent. Since the divorce, we hadn't seen or heard from her, and she hadn't attempted to contact Sally. Excusing myself from the table, I approached her. "Hi, Annie." "Hi, Arthur. How are you?" I inquired. She glanced down at her chicken salad, replying, "You were right, Arthur. You were right about him. Paul convinced me I was his soulmate, and you meant nothing to him. But when I didn't receive the money up front, he persuaded me to gain weight because he loved me and preferred overweight women. After receiving the divorce settlement, you advised me not to give it to him, but I didn't listen. He squandered it in 6 months and then abandoned me." Though I was still upset with her, her story lacked the happy ending mine had. "Since then, I've spent every moment trying to rebuild the confidence he shattered and reclaim some semblance of my former self," she confessed, holding back tears as she looked at me. After all these years, that look resembled the Annie I once knew. "Arthur, I am so sorry. I treated you horribly. I did it because I believed Paul knew things you didn't. I abandoned the man who truly loved me, leaving you unresponsive and—" She paused, gripping the table's edge. "You could have died because of my actions. I know you can never forgive me, but I want to apologize." Tears streamed openly down her face. Surprisingly, Sally had joined us, standing beside me, also witnessing her mother's apology. She gave me a weary smile, grabbed my hand, and extended her hand to her mother. Seeing Sally and then witnessing her extending her hand, Annie panicked, attempting to leave, but Sally blocked her path. "Mom, stop! You don't need to leave!" Sally asserted. Sliding into the booth next to Annie, Sally and I joined her. I glanced at Tina, who nodded in agreement. For the next hour, mother and daughter conversed. There were many tears shed, but for once, they were healing, not hurtful. Once they caught up, Sally and I reintroduced Annie to everyone else. Annie seemed a bit unsettled when introduced to Keegan as Auntie Annie. Following that day, we gradually welcomed Annie back into our lives. Sally and her mother reconnected slowly, meeting for coffee every week or two. Trust developed gradually between them, but eventually solidified. When Sally got married, Annie had the opportunity to play the role of mother of the bride. Tina occasionally invited Annie over for dinner at our house. Initially, I suspected it was to spite Annie for what she had lost, and Tina had gained by marrying me. However, while they never became close friends, Tina and Annie developed an odd sort of friendship that I never quite understood. Rhonda never forgave Annie for the injury she inflicted on me, although she remained polite when they encountered each other. With Tina's approval, Annie and I engaged in some post-marriage counseling. We addressed many of the issues from our past, spanning over 5 years ago. The counselor speculated that Annie might have been experiencing hormonal imbalances, but Annie vehemently rejected this notion. No, I threw away the most precious things in my life that day. I had a loving husband and a daughter who wanted to be with me. No hormonal imbalance can justify how I destroyed everything good in my life for someone who was nothing but trouble in bed and had an inadequate appendage, she remarked with a sweet smile directed at me. "Arthur and Sally deserve better from me," she admitted tearfully, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "It took me 5 years to reconnect with them. I thank God every day that Arthur has allowed me back into his life. And Tina, too," she blushed, acknowledging Tina's warmth towards her despite everything. "She had every reason to hate me, yet she has always treated me kindly. I got lucky losing everything I discarded, and I will bear that burden for a long time." Annie gained more from those counseling sessions than I did. It was reassuring to confirm that neither Sally nor I were responsible for Annie's decision to leave us. And she was right. Tina had lifted us up and forged a stronger family bond.
They say people pay for their mistakes eventually, and Paul did. He moved to another state and once again attempted to manipulate a married woman for her money. This time, however, the woman's husband caught Paul in the act and took matters into his own hands, rendering Paul incapable. The husband received a 10-year sentence, but if Rhonda's rumors were accurate, he might be released sooner. Tina and I are still deeply in love. I never imagined I could love anyone as much or as deeply as I did Annie, but Tina proved me wrong. She not only gave me her love, but also her soul wholeheartedly. We continue to work together in her company, and I'm still in the same job. While we have our ups and downs, we always prioritize communication when it matters. Her physique remains remarkable, and we still make love frequently. We've even indulged in lovemaking moments in exotic locations while on vacation. Often, just one glance is enough to lead us locking the bedroom door and passionately indulging in each other.
Once, after we had finished making love, showered and dressed, we entered the kitchen to find Sally and Annie engaged in conversation. We had recently learned that Sally was expecting, sparking excitement as the girls discussed the arrival of my first grandchild.
My goodness, Sally, you'd think these two were teenagers with the way they behave. Tina, you'll have to let me in on your secret to keeping Arthur so lively.
Maybe I can get some tips to keep Fred on his toes, Sally teased. Amidst laughter, I blushed. Annie had been casually dating lately, but nothing serious until Fred entered the picture. Mom, let them be. We all know that Dad has been on a mission since... You know, Sally teased mischievously, her eyes twinkling. Annie hesitated while Sally laughed and Tina blushed. I simply leaned back, smirked at my girls, and felt myself stirred again by Tina's presence. Eventually, I excused myself, making my way back to the bedroom, with Tina following shortly after, locking the door behind her.
Story 4.
Michael drummed his fingers against the steering wheel as he turned onto Maple Avenue, the familiar stretch of suburbia where he'd spent his childhood. The afternoon sun painted long shadows across manicured lawns, and the spring air carried the scent of freshly cut grass through his open window. He'd made this drive countless times, but today felt different, heavier somehow, as if the universe knew something he didn't. His wedding ring caught the sunlight as he adjusted his grip on the wheel. 7 years of marriage, and lately things had felt off. Little things. His wife working late more often, missing their usual Sunday brunches, keeping her phone face down on the table. He'd brushed it all aside, telling himself he was being paranoid. After all, they'd built a life together. She wouldn't throw that away. The gravel crunched under his tires as he pulled into his parents' driveway. The two-story colonial looked exactly as it had when he was growing up. His mother's prized roses still lined the walkway, and his father's ancient wind chimes still hung from the front porch. He'd called ahead, but no one had answered. Not unusual for a Tuesday afternoon when his parents typically ran errands. Just a quick stop, he muttered to himself, reaching for his coffee in the cup holder. Grab the books and go. The garage keypad accepted his code with a familiar beep. As the door groaned upward, the musty smell of cardboard and old memories wafted out. His mother's organizational skills were on full display, boxes stacked precisely, each labeled in her neat handwriting. Christmas decorations, tax records 2015 to 2020, Jake's trophies. He noticed there wasn't a box for his own achievements. Michael moved deeper into the garage, scanning the labels. The college textbooks he needed would be somewhere in the back, probably buried under years of accumulated family history. His foot knocked against something metal. Jake's old baseball bat, still preserved like a holy relic. His mother had kept everything of Jake's, while Michael's belongings had slowly disappeared over the years, relegated to garage sales or donation bins. That a car door slammed somewhere nearby. He paused, a box half lifted in his arms. The sound had come from the back of the house, where visitors rarely parked. Then he heard it: laughter. His wife's laugh, musical and light, followed by a deeper chuckle he knew, as well as his own voice. The box slipped from his suddenly numb fingers, landing with a dull thud on the concrete floor. That couldn't be right. His wife was supposed to be at work, giving a quarterly presentation to her department. And Jake lived across town, had no reason to be here on a Tuesday afternoon. Moving to the small window at the back of the garage, Michael wiped away years of dust with his sleeve. His heart pounded against his ribs as he peered out, praying he was wrong, that his mind was playing tricks on him. The scene that greeted him shattered his world in an instant. There they were, walking hand in hand through his parents' backyard. His wife, his college sweetheart, his partner of 9 years, his wife of 7 pressed close against his younger brother Jake. They moved with the easy intimacy of longtime lovers. Their bodies aligned as if they'd practiced this dance 1,000 times before. Jake leaned down, whispered something in her ear. She threw her head back and laughed, reaching up to brush his cheek with her free hand. The gesture was so casual, so familiar, it made Michael's stomach turn. This wasn't a first-time thing. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was routine. The box he dropped had spilled its contents across the floor. Old calculus textbooks, physics notes, remnants of a life when everything made sense. One book had fallen open, pages bent beneath its own weight. Michael stared at it, his mind struggling to process what he'd just witnessed. The equations on the exposed pages swam before his eyes, variables and constants blurring together like his thoughts. That a sudden clarity cut through his shock. He needed to see more, needed to understand just how deep this betrayal went. His legs carried him automatically toward the house's back door, his footsteps echoing in the garage like drum beats, counting down to confrontation. The kitchen door opened silently. He'd fixed that squeak himself last summer, one of many household repairs he'd done to help his parents. The irony of that maintenance, making it easier to catch his wife's infidelity, wasn't lost on him. His mother stood at the counter, arranging flowers in a crystal vase he recognized as a wedding gift from his wife's parents. White chrysanthemums, his wife's favorite flowers. How many times had his mother arranged these flowers for their secret meetings? Michael, his mother startled, nearly dropping the flower she was holding. "I didn't expect you today." Her voice held a note of panic he'd never heard before he could respond. The back door opened. Jake entered first, his confident stride faltering slightly when he saw Michael. His wife followed, her face draining of color so quickly she seemed to age years in seconds. Time seemed to freeze as they all stared at each other. The afternoon sun streaming through the kitchen windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny accusers. The only sound was the gentle ticking of his mother's antique wall clock, counting down the seconds until someone broke this terrible silence. Through the window behind them, Michael could see the garden where he and Jake had played as children, where he proposed to his wife on Christmas Eve 7 years ago, where his mother had hosted countless family barbecues. All those memories felt tainted now, corrupted by whatever had been happening here while his back was turned. "What the hell is this?" His voice came out as a hoarse whisper, each word scraping against his throat like broken glass. His mother quickly stepped between them, her hands raised placatingly. The gesture seemed rehearsed, as if she'd anticipated this moment. "Now, Michael, let's all stay calm." Calm? The word tasted like acid in his mouth. Each breath felt like inhaling broken glass. "You knew about this?" His mother's expression shifted from concern to something harder, more familiar, the look she'd given him countless times growing up when he'd disappointed her. "These things happen, dear. Sometimes people just grow apart." Grow apart? Michael stared at his mother in disbelief, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "They were sneaking around in your backyard, in my parents' house." "Don't be dramatic," his mother said, her tone taking on that dismissive edge he'd heard so many times before. She adjusted her pearl necklace, a nervous habit he'd noticed whenever she was about to say something particularly cruel. "Your wife has needs, Michael. If you'd taken better care of yourself instead of letting yourself go." The words hit him like physical blows. He looked down at himself. True, he'd gained some weight since college, maybe 30 pounds. The long hours at his accounting firm meant more takeout than gym time. But to hear his own mother use that to justify this betrayal. "Mom." Jake stepped forward, placing a hand on their mother's shoulder. The gesture screamed of practiced familiarity, of countless private conversations Michael hadn't been privy to. "Thanks for understanding. We didn't want him to find out this way, but maybe it's for the best." Michael's wife hadn't said a word. She stood slightly behind Jake, her hand clutching the back of his shirt like an anchor. The gesture was so intimate, so familiar, it made Michael's stomach turn. How many times had she held on to Jake like that? How many times had they laughed about him behind his back? "How long?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Jake met his eyes with an almost pitying look, the same expression he'd worn when Michael had lost the state championships in high school. "Does it matter?" How long? 3 months. His wife finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. She stepped forward slightly, though she kept one hand on Jake's shirt. We didn't plan it, Michael. It just happened. Just happened. Michael's laugh was bitter, brittle. In my parents' house? With my own brother? Where else were they supposed to meet? His mother interjected, as if this were the most reasonable thing in the world. She began rearranging the flowers in the vase, her movements precise and controlled. Your wife needed somewhere safe, somewhere she could sort out her feelings without judgment. The implications of her words slowly sank in, each realization another knife in his gut. You've been helping them? Covering for them? His mother lifted her chin, pearl necklace gleaming in the afternoon light. I've been supporting 2 people I care about who found happiness together. If you've been more attentive, more like your brother, more like Jake. Michael cut her off, his voice rising. Your perfect son who's sleeping with his brother's wife? Watch your tone. His mother snapped, her facade of calm cracking slightly. This kind of aggressive behavior is exactly why. Why what, Mom? Why you decided to help my brother steal my wife? Why you've always taken his side? Why nothing I do is ever good enough for you? Jake's smug smile was the final straw. Come on, bro. You had to know she was out of your league from the start. Remember how surprised everyone was when she said yes to your proposal. Michael's fists clenched at his sides, knuckles white with restraint. The urge to lunge at his brother, to wipe that self-satisfied look off his face, was almost overwhelming. But something deeper, colder, was taking root inside him. This wasn't just betrayal, it was conspiracy. His own family had conspired against him. You're all dead to me, he said, his voice deadly calm. The words felt like ice in his mouth, but they carried the weight of absolute truth. All of you. Don't be melodramatic, his mother sighed, turning back to her flowers. This isn't helping anyone. Why don't we all sit down and discuss this like adults? I made your favorite coffee cake this morning. Discuss what? Michael's voice cracked like a whip. How you helped my brother seduce my wife. How you gave them a place to meet behind my back. Or should we discuss how you're actually defending them? His wife stepped forward, reaching for his arm. Michael, please. He jerked away from her touch as if it burned, backing up until he hit the counter. Don't you dare touch me. This is exactly why she came to me, Jake said, wrapping an arm around Michael's wife's shoulders. The possessive gesture made bile rise in Michael's throat. You've always had anger issues, bro. She deserves better than walking on eggshells around you. Anger issues? Michael's laugh was hollow. You fuck my wife, and I'm the one with issues? Language, his mother snapped. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Jake would never what? Never betray his family? Never lie? Never sneak around like a coward? Duh. That's enough. His mother's voice rose sharply. I won't have you speaking to your brother that way in my house. Michael looked at each of them in turn. His mother's disapproving frown, Jake's smug superiority, his wife's guilty but defiant expression. Everything he thought he knew about his family was crumbling around him, revealing the rot that had always lurked beneath the surface. You know what? Keep her, he said to Jake, each word precise and measured. You deserve each other. And Mom, congratulations. You finally have the perfect family you always wanted. Michael, wait, his wife called after him, but he was already walking away. Let him go, he heard Jake say. He'll calm down eventually. He always does. I'll make some tea. His mother's voice followed him. Jake, dear, help me with these flowers. Their voices faded as Michael walked out, each step carrying him further from the life he'd thought he had. In the driveway, he got into his car and sat there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The afternoon sun still shone cheerfully, birds still sang in the trees, and his mother's roses still bloomed by the front walk. The world hadn't ended, even though it felt like it should have. But something had ended his trust, his marriage, his place in this family. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of sleepless nights and meticulous investigation. Michael threw himself into understanding exactly what had happened, how long this betrayal had been festering beneath the surface of his seemingly normal life. Each new discovery was another crack in the foundation of everything he'd believed about his family. His first stop was a private investigator's office in downtown, a discreet storefront wedged between a coffee shop and a bail bonds office. The investigator, a former police detective named Martinez, listened without judgment as Michael laid out what he knew. 3 months, they admitted to, Michael said, sliding an envelope of cash across the desk. I want to know how long it really was. Martinez nodded, pocketing the envelope without counting it. They always minimize. Give me a week. That week stretched into 3 as the evidence mounted. Michael created a war room in his apartment's spare bedroom, pinning bank statements and phone records to cork boards, connecting events with red string like a detective in a crime drama. But this wasn't fiction, this was his life. And each new discovery was another knife in his back. The affair hadn't started 3 months ago, that was just when they'd gotten sloppy enough to almost get caught. Martinez's investigation uncovered restaurant charges and hotel bookings going back at least 6 months. Security footage showed Jake and Michael's wife meeting for lunch dates, shopping trips, weekend getaways disguised as work conferences, but the real betrayal lay in the text messages Martinez recovered. Dozens of conversations between his wife and his mother, planning their meetups, coordinating schedules to avoid detection. His mother hadn't just covered for them, she'd been the architect of it all. "Your Tuesday book club is perfect," one message from his mother read. "Michael never questions it, and Jake can slip out of work early." Another, "Don't worry about the Christmas party. I'll keep Michael busy in the kitchen while you and Jake get some time alone." And the most damning, "He takes after his father, always so oblivious. Some men just can't see what's right in front of them." Michael stared at the messages until the words burned into his retinas. His mother had orchestrated everything, from providing alibis to creating opportunities for their meetings. She'd hosted weekly coffee dates with his wife that were really covers for meetings with Jake. She'd helped them create alibis, warned them when Michael was asking questions, even advised them on how to handle him. When the truth finally came out, the betrayal ran deeper than he'd initially imagined. It wasn't just an affair, it was a systematic campaign to deceive him, orchestrated by his own mother. The more he discovered, the more his anger crystallized into something harder, colder, more focused. One evening, as he was going through another stack of bank statements Martinez had obtained, something caught his eye. An old medical bill, tucked between pages of account summaries. It was from 34 years ago, around the time of his birth. But it wasn't a hospital bill, it was from New Horizons Adoption Agency. Michael's hands trembled as he held the yellowed paper. The letterhead was faded, but the words were still clear. Final placement fee, infant male. The date matched his birth month exactly. He sat back in his chair, the room suddenly spinning around him. Memories flooded his mind, taking on new meaning in light of this discovery. His mother's constant comparisons between him and Jake. The way she'd always emphasized how Jake had her eyes, her smile, while Michael just looked like himself. The family photos where he seemed slightly out of place, his features never quite matching his parents' or Jake's. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, running a hand through his hair. The weight of this new revelation pressed down on his chest like a stone. It explained everything: his mother's lifelong favoritism, her quick defense of Jake's betrayal, the casual cruelty she'd always shown toward him. He wasn't her son. He was an outsider, an intruder in the perfect family she'd wanted. With hands that shook slightly, he opened his laptop and navigated to a DNA testing services website. For kits, he decided, 1 for himself, 1 for Jake, and 2 for his parents. Getting their samples would be tricky, but he'd figure something out. He had to know the truth. He spent the next hour creating a detailed plan in his notebook. His mother's weekly bridge club would provide an opportunity to collect DNA from their coffee cups. Jake's gym habit meant regular water bottle disposal. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing about this situation had been easy. As he wrote, his phone buzzed with a text from Martinez. "Got something big. Meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Michael stared at the message, then at the adoption agency bill, then at the wall of evidence he'd assembled. This wasn't just about his wife's infidelity anymore. This was about his entire identity, about decades of lies and manipulation. Every memory of his childhood, now needed to be re-examined through this new lens that he thought about all the times his mother had praised Jake while criticizing him. All the family gatherings where he'd felt slightly out of place but couldn't explain why. All the subtle ways she'd shown her preference for her real son while treating Michael like an obligation, a charity case she'd taken on and now regretted. "You've always been different," she'd told him once, during a particularly heated argument in his teenage years. At the time, he'd taken it as another criticism. Now he understood it had been a confession, sitting in his apartment, surrounded by evidence of his family's betrayal. Michael made a promise to himself. He would uncover every lie, expose every secret, and make them all pay for what they'd done to him. The game they'd started with their betrayal was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. They thought they'd broken him, but they'd only succeeded in setting him free. Free from the obligations of family loyalty, free from the constraints of conventional morality. They'd created their own worst nightmare, and soon they would understand exactly what that meant. Michael smiled as he began to plan his next move. In his mind, he could already see the dominoes falling, one by one, each revelation leading to another until their carefully constructed world of lies came crashing down around them. They had no idea what was coming. Michael sat across from Detective Martinez in the investigator's cramped office, watching as the older man spread photos across his desk. Early morning sunlight filtered through dusty Venetian blinds, casting striped shadows across the evidence of Jake's secret life. "Your brother's been busy," Martinez said, tapping one photo showing Jake entering an underground casino. 3 visits last week alone, always during his supposed lunch meetings. "Tell me everything." Michael leaned forward, his voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. Martinez pulled out a thick folder. "Jake's got a gambling problem, a big one. He's been hitting underground poker games, illegal betting rings, the works. Based on my sources, he's in deep with some dangerous people." "How deep?" $200 grand minimum. "Maybe more." Martinez slid over a spreadsheet of transactions. "He's been moving money around, trying to cover his tracks, using company accounts to pay his debts." Michael studied the numbers, his accountant's mind quickly spotting the patterns. "He's embezzling from his own firm, cooking the books like a master chef." Martinez handed him another document. "He's created fake vendors, ghost contracts, the whole 9 yards. Been doing it for months. His partners don't suspect anything. They trust him. That's always the key, isn't it?" Martinez's smile was grim. "Just like you trusted him." Michael nodded slowly, pieces clicking into place. "What about his professional conduct?" "That's where it gets interesting." Martinez pulled out another file. "Remember that big case he won last year? The one that made him partner? The Maxwell lawsuit? Turns out he buried evidence that would have lost him the case. Paid off a key witness to change their testimony." Martinez leaned back. "Your brother's not just a cheater in his personal life, he's dirty all the way through." Michael absorbed this information, his mind already calculating angles, seeing possibilities. "Can you give me proof? Something concrete?" "Already did." Martinez patted a USB drive on his desk. "Everything's here: bank records, witness statements, photos, recordings. Enough to ruin him professionally and maybe even put him behind bars." "Perfect." Michael reached for his checkbook. "What else?" "There's more about your wife and mother." Martinez hesitated. "You sure you want to hear it?" "Every detail." Martinez pulled out his phone, playing a recorded conversation. His wife's voice filled the small office. "I can't keep lying to him, Emma." Michael suspects something. His mother's reply was cold. "Then you're not trying hard enough." Michael's always been slow to catch on, just like when he was a child. "Remember what we discussed about the trust fund?" The recording continued, revealing a conversation about accessing Michael's inheritance early, plans to have him declared mentally unstable if he discovered the truth. His own mother and wife, plotting to steal not just his marriage, but everything he had. Those bastards. Michael's whisper was barely audible. They were planning to take everything. "There's one more thing." Martinez handed him a final document. "I did some digging into that adoption agency lead you mentioned. Found this in their archived records." Michael stared at the paperwork, his hands trembling slightly. The document confirmed everything he'd been adopted through New Horizons Agency 34 years ago. But there was more. His biological parents hadn't given him up willingly. There were irregularities in the paperwork, suggestions of coercion and bribery. Your mother, Martinez said carefully. She used her family's influence to push through the adoption. There were other families ahead of them on the waiting list, but money talked. The whole thing was technically legal, but ethically. She bought me. Michael's voice was ice cold, like a designer handbag, then spent the rest of my life regretting her purchase. What are you going to do? Michael stood, gathering the evidence into his briefcase. I'm going to destroy them. All of them. But I need to be smart about it. He turned to Martinez. I need you to keep digging. Every skeleton, every secret, every weakness, I want it all. This kind of revenge, Martinez warned. It can consume you. Michael's smile was sharp enough to cut. Good? Because I'm just getting started. He pulled out his phone, checking his calendar. Jake has a partners meeting next week. Time to light the first fuse. As he left Martinez's office, Michael's mind raced with possibilities. The evidence against Jake was just the beginning. He had the tools now to dismantle their entire world, piece by piece. They taught him an important lesson about family. Now it was time to show them what a good student he'd been. He dialed his phone as he walked to his car. Mr. Phillips? This is Michael. I need to meet with the managing partners at Jake's firm. It's about financial irregularities I've discovered. Yes, it's serious. Very serious. The trap was set. Now it was time to watch them fall. The DNA test results arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. Michael sat in his car outside his parents' house, the envelope heavy in his hands. He'd collected the samples 2 weeks ago, his mother's coffee cup from her bridge club, Jake's discarded water bottle from the gym, his father's used tissues from a conveniently timed visit to drop off old photo albums. His phone buzzed. A text from Martinez. Partners meeting started. Package delivered. Michael smiled grimly. Right now, Jake's law firm partners were opening a detailed dossier of his brother's financial fraud and witness tampering. But that was just the appetizer. The main course sat in his hands, sealed in a clinical white envelope. The lab's logo stared back at him as he carefully opened it. His hands didn't shake. He was past that now. 3 pages of scientific analysis confirmed what he'd suspected. He shared no DNA with either of his parents. Jake, however, was their biological child. His phone rang. Jake's name flashed on the screen. You son of a bitch. Jake's voice trembled with rage. What did you do? Having a rough morning, brother? Michael kept his tone light. Or should I even call you that? The partners just suspended me. They're talking about an ethics investigation. Was this you? Karma's funny that way. How's that gambling debt working out for you? A sharp intake of breath. How did you? 200 grand is a lot of money, Jake. Especially when you're stealing it from your own firm. Tell me, did you think about that when you were fucking my wife? Listen to me very carefully. Jake's voice dropped to a threatening whisper. You have no idea what you're doing. If you don't stop this right now, you'll what? Tell Mom? Go ahead. I'm heading there now anyway. Time for a family meeting. He hung up as Jake sputtered threats, then dialed another number. Detective Romano? Yes, this is Michael. Remember that evidence of financial fraud I mentioned? I just sent it to your office. You'll find everything you need to start an investigation. The front door opened as he walked up the path. His mother stood there, phone in hand, face flushed with anger. Jake just called. What have you done? Michael brushed past her into the house. We need to talk. If this is about your brother's firm, you've gone too far. I've already called our family lawyers. Shut up. The words cracked like a whip. He pulled out the DNA results. Let's talk about this instead. His mother's face went pale. What is that? Proof. He slapped the papers down on her precious antique coffee table. Proof that I'm not your son. That I never was. You had no right, no right. Michael's laugh was bitter. That's rich coming from the woman who bought a baby on the black market. His mother sank into her favorite armchair, pearls clutched in one hand. You don't understand. We wanted another child, but after Jake, save it. Michael circled the room, past the family photos he'd never truly belonged in. Martinez found the original adoption records, the irregularities, the bribes. You didn't just adopt me, you stole me. We gave you everything. His mother's voice rose shrilly. A good home, education, opportunities. You gave me scraps. Michael whirled on her. Everything went to Jake. Your love, your attention, Your pride at all went to your real son. I was just a backup plan. The spare. That's not true. Then why help him steal my wife? Why cover for their affair? Why spend 34 years making me feel like I was never good enough? His mother's face hardened. Because you weren't. Jake has always been exceptional. You try so hard, but you'll never measure up. I thought having another child would be like having another Jake, but instead we got you. The words should have hurt, but Michael felt only cold satisfaction. He'd finally gotten the truth. Well, congratulations, he said softly. Your perfect son is about to be arrested for fraud. His law career is over. And this? He held up the DNA results. This is just the beginning. What are you planning? Fear crept into her voice. You taught me an important lesson, Mother. Family isn't about blood, it's about power. Who has it? Who doesn't? And what you're willing to do to keep it. He moved toward the door. I'm going to take everything from you and Jake. Your reputation, your standing in the community, your precious family name, all of it. You wouldn't dare. After everything we've done for you. Done for me? Michael's voice was deadly quiet. No. What you've done is create your own worst enemy. And now you get to watch as I tear down everything you've built. His mother stood, trembling. I'll stop you. Whatever it takes, I'll protect Jake, like you protected him when he took my wife. Go ahead. Try to stop me. But remember this moment, when you chose him over me one last time. Because everything that happens next, it's on you. He walked out, leaving her clutching her pearls in her perfect living room. His phone buzzed again. Martinez, with an update about Jake's firm. The police were already on their way. Michael smiled as he got into his car. Phase 1 was complete. His brother's career was in ruins, his mother's world was cracking, and he was just getting started. They'd spent years making him feel like an outsider in his own family. Now they'd learned just how dangerous an outsider could be. Michael watched the evening news from his apartment, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. On screen, Jake was doing the perp walk, suit jacket draped over his handcuffs as police led him from his law firm's building. His phone rang. His wife's name flashed on the screen. What have you done? Her voice shook with anger and fear. They're saying Jake embezzled money, that he tampered with evidence. All true. Michael cut her off. Every word of it. Your boyfriend's going to prison. You can't do this to him. I didn't do anything. Jake did this to himself. I just made sure everyone found out. He took a slow breath. But since you called, there's something else you should know. I'm not just divorcing you. I'm suing you and Jake for emotional distress and alienation of affection. You're what? She sounded genuinely shocked. Michael, be reasonable. Reasonable? He laughed. Like when you were reasonably fucking my brother in my parents' house. Or when you were reasonably plotting to have me declared mentally unstable. A sharp intake of breath. How did I have the recordings? You and my mother, planning to steal my inheritance. Very thorough plan. Shame it's all falling apart now. Those conversations were private. Nothing's private anymore. Not for you. Not for Jake. Not for any of you. He stood, walking to his evidence wall. You know what the funny thing is? If you'd just been honest, filed for divorce like a normal person, none of this would be happening. But you had to do it the cruel way. You had to humiliate me. That's not what we save it. I've already sent copies of everything to your family. Your father was particularly interested in the recording where you discuss stealing my inheritance. Guess those Sunday dinners at your parents' house are going to be a bit awkward now. A sob caught in her throat. Please, Michael. We can work something out, like you work things out with Jake? Behind my back. His voice hardened. The lawsuit papers will be delivered tomorrow. Oh, and since Jake's about to lose his law license, you might want to start looking for a good attorney. I hear the partners at his firm aren't feeling very charitable right now. He hung up as she began to plead, then dialed Martinez. How's our friend doing? Michael asked. Jake's looking at serious time, Martinez replied. The DA's building a strong case. Your brother's partners are cooperating fully. Turns out they don't appreciate being stolen from. And the gambling debts? His creditors are getting nervous. Without his job, without access to the firm's accounts. Martinez let the implications hang. Good. Michael checked his watch. What about the other matter? Your mother's been busy. Made 3 calls to her lawyer today, 2 to the family doctor. Looks like she's trying to build a case that you're mentally unstable, just like she planned. Michael smiled. Perfect. Keep monitoring everything. I want to know every move they make. After hanging up, he opened his laptop, checking his emails. The local society pages had already picked up the story of Jake's arrest. His mother's carefully cultivated social circle would be buzzing with gossip. The doorbell rang. Michael checked the security camera feed on his phone. His father stood in the hallway, looking older than Michael had ever seen him. That he opened the door, but didn't invite him in. Dad, son, his father's voice was rough. We need to talk. About what? How you and Mom bought me on the black market. Or how you stood by while she favored Jake all these years. His father flinched. I know you're angry. Angry doesn't begin to cover it. Michael leaned against the doorframe. Did you know about Jake and my wife? A long pause. No, not at first. When I found out, you did nothing. Just like always, your mother is a manipulative sociopath who's about to learn some hard lessons about karma. Michael straightened up. Why are you really here, Dad? His father pulled an envelope from his jacket. Your mother doesn't know I'm here. These are the original adoption papers. The real ones, not the sanitized version we filed with the court. They show everything. How we got you. Who helped cover it up? Michael took the envelope. Why give me this now? Because you deserve the truth. And because... His father looked away. Because I should have stood up for you years ago. Should have been a real father to you. It's too late for that. I know. His father's shoulders slumped. Just, whatever you're planning next, remember that revenge won't fill the hole inside you. Michael studied the man who'd raised him this weak, passive figure who'd let his wife poison their family for decades. No, it won't fill the hole, but it will make sure they feel exactly what they put me through. All of them. Son, I'm not your son. The DNA test proved that pretty definitively. Michael stepped back into his apartment. Go home, Dad. Tell Mom I got the papers. And tell her to watch her back. Because I'm just getting started. He closed the door on his father's pained expression, then opened the envelope. The documents inside were a roadmap of corruption judges who'd been bribed, officials who'd looked the other way, biological parents who'd been coerced. His mother's fingerprints were all over it. Michael added the papers to his evidence wall, then poured himself another whiskey. On TV, they were replaying Jake's arrest. His brother's face was a mask of shock and fear as the officers led him away. The evening news anchor's voice filled the room. More developments in the growing scandal at Matthews and Partners law firm. Senior partner Jacob Matthews was arrested today on charges of embezzlement and witness tampering. Sources say the investigation may extend to other members of the firm. Michael raised his glass to the screen. Cheers, brother. Hope prison food agrees with you. His phone buzzed with a text from Martinez. Your mother's calling an emergency meeting of her charity board tomorrow. Want me to leak the adoption story to the press? Michael typed back, not yet. Let her squirm a little longer. We're just getting to the good part. He walked to his window, looking out over the city. Somewhere out there, his mother was probably trying to damage control, his wife was crying to her family, and Jake was sitting in a cell, finally facing consequences for his actions. But this was just the beginning. He had more cards to play, more secrets to reveal. They'd torn his life apart piece by piece. Now he would return the favor. Michael stood in the observation room at the county jail, watching through one-way glass as Jake paced in his orange jumpsuit. His brother had been in custody for 3 days, and it showed his usual polished appearance had crumbled into nervous exhaustion. Your brother's requesting a meeting, the guard said. Says it's urgent. I bet he does. Michael nodded. Let's give him what he wants. The metal door clanged shut behind him as he entered the visiting room. Jake's head snapped up, hope flashing across his face before being replaced by careful calculation. You look comfortable, Michael said, taking a seat across the table. Cut the crap. Jake leaned forward, lowering his voice. You've made your point. Now, get me out of here. Michael raised an eyebrow. Why would I do that? Because I'm your brother. Damn it. Jake slammed his hand on the table. A guard shifted, watching closely. You've had your revenge. Isn't this enough? Enough? Michael's laugh was cold. You fuck my wife, steal from your firm, and think 3 days in jail makes us even? I can make it right. Jake's voice took on a desperate edge. The firm, they'll drop the charges if I pay everything back. Mom's willing to help with the money. Of course she is. Her golden boy needs saving. What do you want from me? Jake's facade cracked further. An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. I never should have. Spare me. Michael held up a hand. You're not sorry you did it. You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference. The gambling debts, Jake whispered, glancing at the guards. These people, they're not like your PI friend. They'll kill me if I can't pay. Sounds like a personal problem. Jesus Christ, Michael. Jake's voice rose. You want to destroy me? Fine. But Mom's having a breakdown. Dad's a mess. Your wife is being sued for every penny she has. Michael smiled. How's that going, by the way? Her family must be thrilled about the recordings. Jake slumped in his chair. You've changed. The Michael I knew would never. The Michael you knew died the day he caught you in Mom's backyard. He stood up. You want to know the funny part? I found out I'm not even your real brother. Mom and Dad bought me on the black market. Explains a lot, doesn't it? What are you talking about? DNA doesn't lie, Jake. Unlike this family. Michael moved toward the door. Enjoy prison. I hear they love corrupt lawyers inside. Wait. Jake's handcuffs rattled as he stood. These people I owe money to, they'll come after the family. After Mom again. Not my problem. Michael knocked for the guard. You chose this path, brother. Now you get to walk it alone. Back in his car, Michael checked his phone. 3 missed calls from his mother, 2 from his wife, and 1 from Martinez. He dialed the PI first. Got something big, Martinez said without preamble. Your mother's been busy. Made 4 calls to that adoption agency contact from 30 years ago. The one who helped arrange everything. Yeah, guy named Reynolds. Still works there. But here's the interesting part. He's on the board of your mother's favorite charity. The one she chairs. Michael smiled. Let me guess. She's trying to buy his silence? Bingo. Meeting set for tomorrow at the country club. Want me to make sure the press knows about it? No. Michael started his car. I'll handle this one personally. Send me everything you have on Reynolds. Time to add another piece to the board. He drove to his office, where a wall of evidence had grown into a war room. Photos, documents, and sticky notes covered every surface. Each piece a weapon in his arsenal of revenge. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife. Please call me. My family's accounts are frozen. The lawsuit. We can work something out? He ignored it, focusing instead on the latest addition to his wall. A photo of Thomas Reynolds, the adoption agency official who'd helped his mother buy a baby on the black market. The man looked exactly like what he was, a bureaucrat who'd spent decades profiting from other people's desperation. That Michael's desk phone rang his private line. Mr. Matthews? A nervous female voice came through. This is Amanda from the Westbrook Country Club. Mrs. Matthews asked me to confirm your attendance at tomorrow's charity board meeting. She says it's vital you be there. Did she now? Michael leaned back in his chair. Tell her I wouldn't miss it for the world. He hung up and pulled up his mother's charity organization on his laptop. The Westbrook Foundation for Children's Welfare. The irony was almost too perfect. His office door opened. Martinez walked in, carrying a thick folder. Everything on Reynolds, the PI said, dropping the file on Michael's desk. Guy's got skeletons in his closet going back decades. Used the adoption agency to run a nice little side business in baby brokering. My mother's not the only one he helped. Not by a long shot. Rich families, desperate for children, willing to pay top dollar to skip the waiting lists. Martinez tapped the folder. Reynolds kept records. Detailed ones. Insurance, Michael mused. In case anyone tried to expose him. Exactly. But he missed one thing. Martinez pulled out a single sheet of paper. Your mother kept her own insurance. Found this in a safety deposit box she opened right after your adoption. Michael scanned the document, his smile growing colder. A confession. Reynolds admitted to everything in writing. The bribes, the forged papers, the threats to the biological parents. Your mother's smart. She made sure she had leverage over everyone involved. And now we have leverage over all of them. Michael stood, gathering the papers. Time to prepare for tomorrow's meeting. Mom wants to play charity queen? Let's see how she handles a very public dethroning. He spent the next hour reviewing Reynolds' files, building a precise picture of the man's crimes. 3 decades of selling babies to wealthy families, using his position at the adoption agency as cover. His mother was just one client among many, but tomorrow, she'd be the one who brought it all crashing down. His phone buzzed again. His wife, still trying to reach him. He thought about their last conversation, her pleas for mercy falling on deaf ears. She'd chosen her side. Now she could share in Jake's downfall. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the end. His mother's carefully constructed social world was about to implode, taking her reputation, her power, and her precious charity with it. And Michael would be there to watch it burn. The game was entering its final phase. All the pieces were in place. Now it was time to deliver the killing blow. The Westbrook Country Club's boardroom gleamed with old money and privilege. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the mahogany table where 12 of the city's most influential people sat, all members of his mother's precious charity board. Michael noted the empty seat beside Thomas Reynolds, the adoption agency official who'd helped his mother buy him 34 years ago. His mother stood at the head of the table, pearls perfectly arranged, her social mask firmly in place despite the strain around her eyes. She faltered slightly when she saw Michael enter. "Michael," she recovered quickly, voice honey sweet. "I'm so glad you could join us. Everyone, this is my son, am I?" Michael interrupted, setting his briefcase on the table. "Your son? That's not what the DNA test says." A murmur ran through the board members. His mother's smile tightened. "This isn't the time or place. Actually, it's exactly the right time and place." Michael turned to the board. "Did you know your chairwoman bought a baby on the black market? That she used this very charity to launder money for illegal adoptions?" Reynolds half rose from his chair. "Now see here, sit down, Tom." Michael's voice could have frozen hell. "Unless you want everyone to see the confession you signed 34 years ago? The one detailing how you threatened my biological parents?" Reynolds collapsed back into his chair, face ashen. Michael pulled out a stack of documents. "In fact, why don't we review some interesting financial records? It seems the Westbrook Foundation has been a very busy organization." "This is outrageous," a board member protested. "Emma, what is he talking about?" His mother's composure cracked. "Michael, please, what? Keep quiet about how you've used this charity to hide decades of crimes? About how you and Reynolds here have been selling babies to the highest bidder." He began distributing copies of documents around the table. Bank records, witness statements, Reynolds' written confession. Everything you need to understand exactly what kind of person has been running your charity. "These documents are confidential," Reynolds sputtered. "We're confidential," Michael corrected. "Just like the records of all the other families you helped. Should we talk about the Anderson case? Or the Williams adoption? How many lives have you ruined, Tom?" The boardroom erupted in chaos. Members grabbed for the documents, exclaiming in shock as they read. His mother stood frozen, watching her carefully constructed world crumble. "You can't do this," she whispered. "I already have." Michael turned to the board. "Oh, and before I forget, the police are on their way, along with reporters from every major news outlet in the city. I thought they might be interested in how the city's most prestigious children's charity has been facilitating illegal adoptions." As if on cue, camera flashes began lighting up the country club's windows. Sirens wailed in the distance. "You're destroying everything." His mother's voice shook with rage. "The foundation does good work, like you did good work when you bought me? When you spent my entire life punishing me for not being Jake? I gave you everything. You gave me scraps." Michael's voice filled the room. "Everything went to Jake. Your love, your attention, your pride, it all went to your real son. And when he decided to steal my wife, you helped him do it?" The board members watched in stunned silence as decades of family drama exploded in front of them. "Jacob is in prison," his mother spat. "Isn't that enough revenge for you?" "Prison?" A board member gasped. "Emma, what is going on?" Michael smiled coldly. "Oh, you hadn't heard? Her precious Jake was arrested for embezzlement and witness tampering. He's facing 20 years. But that's not the best part." He turned to the board. "Want to know what else your chairwoman's been up to? Like helping my wife and brother carry on an affair? Or plotting to have me declared mentally unstable to steal my inheritance?" Police officers began filing into the room. Detective Romano nodded to Michael as he approached Reynolds. "Thomas Reynolds, we have some questions about your adoption practices." "This is all a mistake," Reynolds stammered. "Emma, tell them Tell them what? Michael cut in. How you two have been working together for decades. How many other families have paid for babies? How many other lives have you destroyed? His mother's face had gone ghost white. Michael, she pleaded. Think about what you're doing. Think about the family. Family? Michael laughed. You mean the family that betrayed me? The family that conspired against me? That family? Camera crews pushed into the room, reporters shouting questions. The board members began gathering their things, trying to distance themselves from the unfolding scandal. Mrs. Matthews, is it true the foundation has been involved in illegal adoptions? Mr. Reynolds, did you facilitate black market baby sales? What about the allegations of embezzlement? Michael watched as his mother's social status evaporated in real time. Her carefully maintained image of philanthropic dignity crumbled under the weight of truth and camera flashes. The foundation is finished, he told her quietly. Your reputation is finished. Everything you built, every connection you cultivated, every lie you told, it's all coming down. Why? She whispered. Why go this far? Because you taught me an important lesson about family. Michael gathered his briefcase. You taught me that blood doesn't matter. Power does. And now, he gestured to the chaos around them. Now you have none. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. Oh, and Mom? Jake sends his regards from prison. Seems he's having trouble adjusting to life without his mommy to protect him. The last thing he saw as he walked out was his mother collapsing into her chair, her perfect world shattered beyond repair. Outside, reporters swarmed him, microphones thrust in his face. Mr. Matthews, can you comment on the allegations? What evidence do you have of illegal adoptions? Is it true your brother is in prison? Michael faced the cameras, ready to deliver the final blow. It was time to tell the world exactly what kind of person Emma Matthews really was. Time to ensure that everyone knew the truth about the city's most respected charity chairwoman and her decades of secrets. The game was almost over. And he had won. 2 weeks after the charity board meeting, Michael stood in his office, watching the morning news. The anchor's voice filled the room as footage played of his mother being led from her house in handcuffs. In continuing coverage of the Westbrook Foundation scandal, Emma Matthews, former chairwoman of the prestigious children's charity, has been arrested on charges of fraud and conspiracy. This follows the earlier arrests of adoption agency official Thomas Reynolds and Mrs. Matthews' son, prominent attorney Jacob Matthews. His phone rang. Martinez, quite a show you've put on, the PI said. Your mother's arrest is all over the news. How's she handling it? Not well. Her lawyer's pushing for house arrest, citing health concerns. But with Reynolds turning state's evidence, Michael smiled. Amazing how quickly loyalty crumbles when people face prison time. Speaking of prison, Martinez continued, Jake's creditors are getting impatient. Word is they're planning to collect from your parents since Jake's assets are frozen. Not my problem anymore. Michael turned off the TV. What about my wife? Living with her parents. The lawsuits destroyed her financially. Her father had to remortgage their house to pay the legal fees. Martinez paused. She tried visiting Jake in prison yesterday. They denied her access. Seems Jake's told the guards he doesn't want to see her anymore. Trouble in paradise? More like reality setting in. Prison has a way of changing perspectives. A knock at his office door interrupted them. I'll call you back, Michael said. Hanging up, his father stood in the doorway, looking aged beyond his years. Can we talk? Michael gestured to a chair. His father sat heavily, pulling out a folded newspaper. The headline screamed, Charity chair arrested. Decades of fraud exposed. Your mother's lawyer called, his father said quietly. They're offering a deal. If you drop the lawsuit against your wife, agree not to testify. Not happening. Son Michael, his father corrected himself. Haven't they suffered enough? Michael leaned forward. Let's review what they've suffered, shall we? Jake's in prison for crimes he actually committed. Mom's facing charges for frauds she actually perpetrated. My wife's broke because she chose to betray me. How is any of that my fault? The family name isn't my family name, is it? The DNA test proved that pretty clearly. His father slumped further. We loved you. Maybe not the way we should have, but we did. No, you didn't. Michael's voice was ice. You tolerated me. Mom resented me. And Jake? Jake saw me as something to compete with, then something to steal from. I should have stopped it, his father admitted. Should have stood up to your mother years ago. But you didn't. You watched her favor Jake, watched her tear me down, watched her help them destroy my marriage. You watched everything and did nothing. I was weak. Yes, you were. Michael stood. And now you get to watch everything crumble. The house is being seized as evidence. Mom's social standing is destroyed. Jake's career is over. The family name you're so worried about? It's going to be synonymous with fraud and corruption. His father pulled out one more document. There's something else you should know. About your biological parents. Michael held up a hand. Stop. I don't want to know. But they might. My what? Want to meet me? Form a relationship. Michael laughed bitterly. I've had enough family to last a lifetime. They were good people, his father pressed. Your mother and Reynolds, the threats they used, are all coming out in the trial. Michael moved to the door. Go home, Dad. Take care of Mom. She's going to need it when the press camping outside finally gets a comment from her. After his father left, Michael returned to his evidence wall. Most of the documents had served their purpose now, but he kept them as reminders. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife. Please. We need to talk. I'm staying in my parents' house. Just give me one chance to explain. He deleted the message without responding. Let her sit in her parents' house, dependent on their charity, watching her comfortable life slip away. Let her live with the consequences of her choices. His desk phone rang. Detective Romano. Thought you'd want to know, the detective said. Reynolds is singing like a bird. Gave us everything on the adoption scams. Your mother's going away for a long time. And Jake, the DA's offering 20 years. With the evidence you provided about the witness tampering, he doesn't have much choice but to take it. Michael hung up and walked to his window. From his office, he could see the courthouse where Jake would be sentenced next week. The country club where his mother's empire had crumbled. The expensive neighborhood where his wife was hiding at her parents' house, all the pieces of their lives, scattered and broken. Just like they'd broken him, his secretary buzzed in. Mr. Matthews? Reporter from the Times on line 1. They want to comment about your mother's arrest. Tell them no comment. Michael turned from the window. I've said everything I need to say. That evening, Michael drove to his parents' house one last time. He parked across the street, watching as police evidence teams continued their search. Crime scene tape wrapped the property like Christmas ribbons. News vans lined the street. Hungry for any glimpse of the disgraced society queen, the roses his mother had tended so carefully were wilting, untended since her arrest. The precious lawn where she'd hosted charity events was trampled by police boots and camera crews. The perfect facade she'd maintained for decades was cracking, revealing the rot beneath. This house, this shrine to family lies, had witnessed it all. His wife and brother's betrayal, his mother's manipulation, years of favoritism and cruelty disguised as love. Now it was just another crime scene. Michael smiled as he drove away. They'd created this outcome themselves, with every lie, every betrayal, every moment they'd made him feel like an outsider in his own family. He'd just shown them what a real outsider could do. The game was over, and he'd won it all.